we did our first session. It was an Instagram live session, and again conducted by Rahul and Anupam, and they both did an amazing job. And those who couldn't attend the first session, in the chat window, I will share the link of the recording of that session. So you guys can, just go through that session also if you have missed that one. And in the first session, they very beautifully, explained and exhibited all the microphones which they are going to show in this second and the third session. And also they shared in detail what's all is in store for you guys in the upcoming sessions. So not taking any more time, I now shall pass on the baton to Rahulji and Anupamji. And also with us, we have Mr. Suman Thakur today. He's the
Hi.
head of technical service and support at Sennheiser India. So guys, this is going to be a very exciting session. I'm all charged up. Hope you guys too are. So please, let's be tuned. And yes, over to you, Rahulji.
Thank you so much, Piyush. Thank you so much, Suman sir. Hi, Anupam again. Good to see you again. Hello to
Always good
everyone
to
who's
see you.
attending. All the participants I can see the numbers slowly going higher and higher.
Yes.
Thanks to everyone that's taken the interest in this session. We had a lot of fun doing this, and we really can't wait to share all our findings, everything with you. And it's just been a great experience. Uh, like Piyush mentioned, we did the first part of this season, which was on an Instagram live call where Anupam and I just sort of broke the ice, kind of outlined what we were going to do. So, for anyone who missed that, just to give you a quick recap, like Piyush mentioned, what we intend to do is a lot of people, particularly in this lockdown and even, just leading up to this lockdown, a lot of drummers in particular were very interested in starting to record themselves at home instead of going to a studio. And there are so many permutations and combinations of doing that, and we just wanted to throw some light on all the possibilities and everything that you could do at your end to ensure you can record drums, and then work with seasoned engineers like Anupam, or if you have a friend who's an engineer, and how you could team up with someone and actually get the desired results you need. So for someone like me in particular who's just started, I mean, while I have a lot of experience in recording drums with a lot of fabulous engineers, doing this solo by myself from start to end, this has been a great learning experience. So want to start off by thanking the Sennheiser, everyone at Sennheiser, for everything you've done, all the support and all of that. So again, hi Anupam. Do you want to
Hi Rahul.
add anything to this before we really dive into this session?
I think you pretty much covered everything, but just to uh, add to that, I would like to say that the whole point of this exercise is also in case you don't have access to any engineer friends, which is
Yep.
might be the case. Like you're just a drummer and you're at home and you're a loner and you don't like talking to people. It happens sometimes. Then you can just do this by yourself. I think that it kind of reinforces the whole idea of DIY that we've always been pushing.
Absolutely. And the whole point of this exercise is it could be intimidating to record so many mics at the same time and get the desired results you need. We're going to try and just simplify that process for all you drummers in this chat and just recording enthusiasts, anyone who's really interested in understanding how to record drums. So without further ado, we have a lot of information, and you're going to be in for a long chat. So get yourself some water or coffee or whatever it is at this time of the day you want to get. We recommend you use headphones. We're going to keep emphasizing on this through and through. And I would say, if possible, maybe boost your headphones a little louder so you can hear things slightly clearer if there's anything that feel that it's lacking. So yes, let's get into this straight away. I just want to briefly touch upon a slight introduction bit of Anupam's relationship and with me, and we go back to 2005. We discussed a little bit about this on the Instagram live chat. We've known each other since 2004, I think. Sorry, not 2005. And our
4 or 5,
love
one of them.
somewhere around there, yeah, maybe even three, but whatever, through GigPad or whatever. But we've our love for loud music, our love for heavy metal music is kind of what got us together, and we've always exchanged notes ever since then on how to sort of record drums, what kind of drum sounds work, what kind of snare tunings work, how to just go about that entire process. And that's been the core of our friendship and our relationship ever since then. Like that's definitely, and from there, so we've worked together with Bhayanak Moth extensively. Anupam has helped us record 2 albums in a studio, which were mammoth tasks in terms of the number of inputs we used in recording drums, the kind of facilities we used, all of that. After that, we had a brief stint where we worked together, at that studio, which was a studio I started in Bombay. Anupam came on as an engineer there, and it was a great 3-year period. I think that we did a lot of work. We did a lot of session work, a lot of jingle work, a lot of drum recordings. It was the staple over there was drum recordings basically.
Yeah.
And then in the whole commercial live segment scene, we also did a lot of work with Preetham. That's where we kind of came together first in the whole commercial scene, and then we started doing our own things. But so that's sort of our history, and from 2004 to now, we've been here doing this for a long time. So yeah, just it really helps that uh, I have an engineer in Anupam, that we have such a old history and we really trust each other. I trust his judgment. He knows what kind of a drummer I am, and that relationship. Just want to throw some light on that and why this session was so important, because both of us are doing this together, and it was a great way to start the first of probably many more educational series like this. So yeah, so that's the basic introduction. Anupam, if you want to add anything to this, I know I asked you the last time and you said, yeah, it's you got everything. But anything else you want to just throw light on, and then we can start, like I said, breaking down this session.
I think from an engineer's perspective, it's very easy to work with a drummer. Especially when we took, after working for so long on Bhayanak Moth. I mean, when we went to shows, there was a clear difference between the way we worked and the way other bands, so to say.
True.
Like,
Yeah.
like I just to give a very small example, as soon as you were done with your tuning, you would start playing the kick, and that was like we didn't need to.
Yeah.
There
Yeah.
wasn't that moment of confusion. Are you ready? Okay, can we start? No, there was a dhug, dhug, dhug. Okay, we are on.
Right. Absolutely. Yeah.
Just
So yeah,
just small stuff like that, man. It's a conversation, and it's like any other relationship. So
yeah. Yeah.
it's amazing to have that.
Awesome. So without further ado, let's start off by just breaking down what we have in store for everyone that's participating today. So what we've done is we've basically recorded. We have 3 broad sections. Okay, so there's a set A, a set B, and a set C. Set A has 2 categories to it, where we've used a bunch of mics on the same drum kit, and I've played the same groove. And what we've done is we've played with the room mic setting in that particular set, which is set A. So what we're going to be doing for you is going to be playing pre-recorded content that we've recorded and mixed, and we're going to go through. You'll see all of that and you'll get an idea what's going on with that. But that's set A essentially, and set A, like I said, has 2 parts. The first highlight of set A is basically we have the room mic in 2 separate positions, in 2 different positions. One is actually facing the kit, and one is in rejection with the kit, which is facing away from the kit or against this wall. As you can see, my kit is behind me. The room mic was actually facing that way and not towards the kit. So we have some options. We're going to just toggle through different pre-recorded clips that we have ready for you, and that's what setup A is. Broadly, setup B is we've kind of stuck to the same combination of mics. We've changed the room mic. We've left the room mic in a rejection position, because by this point in the exercise, we kind of realized in this room that I'm recording in my studio, sort of having a mic against the drum kit works better than facing the drum kit. So we did the second test with that, and all we did is we changed the overheads in that case. We will be outlining each mic as we go along, and just want to sort of exhibit the difference between, or rather compare what a really expensive pair of overheads sound like, as opposed to I wouldn't say not so expensive, but I mean, a really well-defined pair as well, and those differences can kind of create in your spread and in the image that you create for yourself. And the third part is something I'm really excited about, and I think a lot of you could benefit from this. Is basically we've stuck 4 different mics on the same snare while I've played the same groove, and this is just for you, for yourselves, to hear the difference between each mic and decide for yourselves probably what mic do you think would work for you, and even touch upon certain aspects of if you're working on a budget, or if you don't have access to all these mics, what you could actually consider for yourselves in your setup at home or at your studio, wherever this is. So that's sort of the broad outline. There was a slide in the beginning of this chat that said we're going to be answering all questions at the end. So I would request all of you to send in your questions onto the Q&A section. Let's leave the chat casual, just simple hi, hellos, and everyone. I can see the chat is exploding. Hi to everyone. I'll keep toggling in and saying hi and responding over there in between, showing you some content and all of that. So those are the 3 broad sections. What I would suggest is, if you have a question for setup A, with the room mic facing the kit. Maybe address that in the Q&A, saying setup pertinent to this section, so we know how to answer that question best. And also, I would say hold on to your questions, because with the amount of information we're going to be throwing out, there's a good possibility we might just answer your question in the course of the seminar. So, which is why we said leave the questions for the end. So maybe make a mental note of it or just write it down somewhere. And towards the end of this call, we can have all the questions come in. We'll address everything then. Cool. So if everyone is set, like I said, if you're comfortable sitting in your place, we're going to start beginning. So we're going to begin with basically what our input list was. What we're going to talk about is, let's start by talking about what kind of setup I have over here. I have a 8-channel interface, which means I can run in 8 mics. And normally when you're recording drums, in the past when Anupam and I have recorded drums, we were normally running maybe 14, 16, 18 channels maybe.
At least 11. At least
Yeah.
11.
But like there have been some experiments where we've gone quite crazy. Right?
21.
21. That's the highest number. But over here we have just 8 channels. All right. So there was a lot of elimination, a lot of selection, and a lot of attention we paid to what channels we really need and what inputs we really need. So I'm going to start off by talking very briefly about my drum kit setup. It's a pretty standard setup in terms of there's 1 snare, 2 rack toms, and a floor tom. But for the purpose of this exercise, I actually dropped 1 floor tom, my smaller floor tom, left a simple 12-inch rack tom and a 16-inch floor tom, sort of a smaller 4-piece setup, so as to get 1 extra input that we could use. Why I'm bringing this up is because you might be in a situation like this maybe when you're recording at your place, where you have an elaborate setup but you don't have as many inputs. So I'm going to hand it over to Anupam here now, just to add a little more light onto this. What are the kind of considerations someone would have or someone should keep in mind when you're recording drums? Now let's say you have only 8 channels, okay? And the mics we received were 2 kick mics, which is an in and an out. We received a bunch of 4 options for 4 tom mics. We had 2 sets of overheads. We had the MD421, which was like a sort of, we kept moving that around into different positions to see how that worked. If you had all these options, but you had only 8 inputs, let's start with kind of what would you start prioritizing with? Like what are the must-haves that you have to mic up to at least start getting sounds?
So, Rahul, I think while we were doing this, I believe, just to give some background, we initially were playing around with the idea of probably adding more channels. But I think at the end, just working with 8 channels was really beneficial, because it kind of, I really like working with limitations, because it helps you think out of the box, and it also helps you cut all the fat out of the mix. So what happens is that you kind of, you really tend to prioritize, okay, this is what I have. This is what I absolutely must get. So for me in particular, especially since we are working in a relatively, I won't want to say small room, but it's not a big room like say a YRF, like a Yashraj.
Yep.
So in that kind of situation, I definitely wanted a room mic to get a picture. So that was one priority. We obviously had to have 2 overheads to give a reasonable mixture, reasonable spread. So 3 so far. You absolutely need at least a kick in mic.
Yeah.
It's better if you can do both kick in and kick out.
We had the luxury of 2 mics, so we decided to prioritize that. Yeah.
We could have gone with, instead of going with kick out, we could have gone with snare bottom. But because we had such good overheads, and again, it's a small room, and I didn't go overboard on gating my mics, I kind of got away with not having to use the snare bottom. I would always urge everyone to use snare bottom if you can, because it's an important flavor, and it gives you that snare wire thump from your kick drum when you. The other thing is hi-hats. So I think many years back we realized that perhaps we can skip the hi-hat channel.
So that also, just putting this out there, sorry to cut you short, just putting this out there, it again depends from drummer to drummer. Now, I'm the kind of drummer, I have a really heavy touch. Like it's very
and loud
obvious.
cymbals.
And loud cymbals. That's my vibe. That's what I like. So we kind of realized in most of the recordings we've done in the past, there was always a hi-hat mic in place, but more often than not, we kind of never used that input, or very sparingly used that input. If it was just a closed hat part, which is very rare in a Bhayanak Maut song, but if there was something like that, then maybe we would engage that mic. But otherwise, yeah, a hi-hat mic it's a big yes for a lot of people. And again, it depends on the style of playing, the music, what kind of drummer you are, what kind of touch you have, all these factors. So yeah.
I just want to add that again, going with the theme of playing with limitations, a hi-hat mic, I would consider it to be in the luxury list.
Yes, yes.
Like say a stereo room would be in the luxury list, or having that a wurst mic, which is what you place between your snare and your toms. It gives a very nice thing. But these are all in the luxuries list. This is not the bread and butter.
Yeah.
So we had to cut it down to bread and butter. And in that scheme of things, the hi-hat mic did play out. So that leaves us with if you were going with the three-tom setup, then we would have been in a bit of trouble.
Yeah.
I would have probably sacrificed the kick out mic in that case, but I think we felt that for the purpose of this workshop, it was better that we use the kick out mic as opposed to a second rack tom, which in with your kind of playing, and I mean you can make it work. I know it for a fact.
Right, exactly. I mean, at the end of the day, the whole point of this exercise is also to just exhibit how you can record drums, and that's, we want to leave it like you said, bread and butter, basic stuff, not the luxury, not the jam, not the Nutella that goes on top, but just leaving it. If you had to leave it simple, and it's surprising. I mean, not surprising, but it is extremely effective. You can get the drum sound you need with 8 mics, with just knowing your room, knowing the mics, and uh, starting off like getting the basics right, and then after everything else will flow. So
I just want to
yeah,
quickly
yeah.
also add. So we had the option of using an MD421, which is traditionally a fantastic floor tom or tom mic.
Our usual go-to flow tom or
A
tom
usual
mic.
go-to, and I think that's where we started with. But I think at the
Yeah.
end of the test, we had a conversation where I was very clear about the fact that for me, a snare, again, as a matter of priorities, miking the snare with the best dynamic mic you have is far higher than miking a flow tom, which you're going to hit once in a couple of hours.
Right.
So I can make a flow tom with a fantastic mic like a 904 work, but I would rather have the cream of the crop sitting on my snare, which is the 421.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So that's kind of what we did, as you'll see in the videos to come. In the first teaser that you might have seen that we put out with that Sennheiser put out, we actually had the 906 on the snare and the MD421 on the flow tom. But then towards these sessions, we kind of bought the 421 onto the snare and left a 904 on the flow tom, and you'll see what that sounds like as well. So yeah, that's I guess that's probably highlighted what we wanted to talk about in terms of our input list and how important it is to actually select. So let's say if you know it's a song where there's a lot of snare, there's a lot of groove that you're playing, which is kick, snare, hats, maybe a few fills here and there, like a pop setup or whatever like that, then you can accordingly prioritize what your input list should be. But if you're in a metal band and you have 3 rack toms and you have 2 flow toms, you have a plethora of cymbals and all of that, obviously you're going to be you might want to consider more inputs, but you can make that work also with 8 inputs, and hopefully the fundamentals and the basics that you learn from here is something you can apply to that, right? So I guess that section is clear. I just had one addition I wanted to add to this, and I'm just going to loosely touch upon this because this workshop is more so, it's more mic specific, microphone specific, and mic placement specific and all of that. But as a drummer, just a side note, I mean, every drummer has his own touch, his or her own touch, or his or own approach to several things like tuning and placement of things. Like, you know, your bass drum could be dead center, a kind of little off axis. I mean, you want to leave it at an angle somewhere. You can leave your toms a certain way from a certain distance from the snare, your cymbals at a certain height. All of these things play a factor, and it's always something to consider when you are going to record. So a good test is always maybe just record yourself on your phone or just a single mic to just kind of hear what's going on. That gives you an image or at least an idea of what in your playing sticks out, or what kind of works, what doesn't work, what's required, what's not required, and it'll help you eliminate and just make the process a lot more streamlined. So there are going to be a lot of tips and tricks like this that we're going to keep throwing in. But coming back to the point about drummers, okay, tuning is a very important aspect. You know, and it's very subjective. Like, every drummer likes to tune their drums a certain way. If you're a jazz drummer, it's sort of on the higher side of things. I personally like that John Bonham kind of big wet toms. So, you know, that's my approach, and that reflects in my playing a certain way. And that's just a few things to keep in mind. So, you know, it's very specific to each drummer and each approach that each drummer has. And also the kind of music you're playing. If it's heavy metal or the loud things in the louder scheme of things, you can tune and adjust things a certain way. But if it's softer music or if it's more articulate and extremely dynamic music, things change there. So again, this is just to broadly outline as a drummer what you should do as your due diligence before you even start setting mics up on a drum kit, is understanding where you are, what you want to achieve as a drum sound. So fine. Without getting into more detail, that's just a brief topic. You can send in some questions if you want to the Q&A, and maybe we can address that. But that's just to touch upon how, for example, a different drummer on the same drum kit will sound, the drums will sound very different as opposed to me playing on it. And that just goes to show, like, it's all in the touch and the hands, and a combination of that with the microphones and where they're placed and all of that. So it starts with you, then it extends to the second step, which is actually placing these mics, selecting the right mics, placing them where you need to, and then going ahead with step 3. So yeah, that's just a basic introduction into what we have. So I think now let's start in. I can already see some questions are coming in. That's great. Awesome. I can see 2 questions come in. We will get to that in a bit. What we're going to do now is, for everyone listening, just so if you want to make a note, we're going to start showing you some pre-recorded footage that we produced at this place and Anupam has mixed at his end. And we're just going to show you options of everything that we have, right? So just so you can note, this is setup A. Like I said, there are the 3 broad sections to this. This is setup A and beat 1. The thing to remember in this is with our room mic facing the kit. So if you have any questions pertinent to this, you can just say setup A, room mic facing, and then you can follow your question after that, and we can do that. So just give me a second. I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to start with this process. Okay, so here we go. What we're going to do is we're going to just first show you, this is, if everyone can see this, this is what we've kind of started off with. We've used the E902 on our kick, which is on the out. We've used the 901 on the in. Unfortunately, we couldn't get a camera in there to show you what that angle was like. This is our MD421 on the snare. That front grill, as you can see, is kind of pointing to the center of the snare. That's always a big priority, and that distance that you can see, we'll get more into that. E904 is on the rack tom and the flow tom. You'll see the flow tom in a second. You can see it's kind of dead center there, capturing the center of the drum, which is what you want. And again, on the flow tom, the focus over here was to capture the low end of the flow tom, and not, I mean, that was the priority. So that's kind of where we left that. The beautiful KM184s, we can't thank Sennheiser enough for sending us these guys. They really just changed everything for us. Beautiful, beautiful overhead mics. Multi-purpose. You can use them across anything. We've used an E906. I'm sorry?
Nothing. I'm just
yeah, an E906 on the as a room mic. And you can see this is sort of the realistic position where it was. We left it a little higher, facing. All right, let me just pause this before this guy starts. All right. So that's just to give you a brief outline of setup A, what the mics were that we used and sort of where they were positioned, so you can have a visual image. We'll obviously get into more detail as we go along with this. So I'm going to start with the first round again, like I said. So I'm going to share my desktop. As you can see, this is the setup. Snare, 1 rack tom, 1 flow tom. I have a bunch of cymbals. Okay, that's great. Every drummer likes that. You can see my spread is sort of heavier on the right, my right. And I find myself playing more on that side. So, you know, even that would affect the way we have our overheads and all of that. Let me just scroll this all the way to the front. Now, this is setup A and beat 1 with the room mic facing the kit. And this is what the drums sound like raw. And what I mean by raw is they're leveled, they're gain staged, everything is fine. And it's corrected. And that's all we have going on with this. So let's give you guys a little demo of this. Just so you, now that you have an idea of that, I'm going to just solo the kick now, so you can hear what both these kick mics sound like together. And this is just the kick soloed, right? So you can hear it's catching a little bit of snare bottom.
Mind you, this is with the gate on.
And this is with the gate on, right?
Yeah.
And you can hear that.
You hear the gate opening with the.
You can hear the gate opening when you go to the cymbals particularly. Now what we're going to do is, this is. This is just our kick, snare, and our overheads. I'm waiting to go on to a tom fill so you can actually hear what the toms sound like with just. Right? So that was that. This is just our room mic, which is facing the kit. All right, sweet. And finally, this is what everything sounds together. This is a full mix of all the 8 mics. So that's 2 kick mics, 1 snare mic, 2 tom mics, 2 overheads, and a room. And again, remember, this is the room facing the drum kit. I'm going to let this video play through. All right. So that was the full mix. I just have a couple of more options over here for you guys to listen to. So this is just the raw drums again, just so we can hear the difference.
I just want to say that these all these drums on the raw file, they have the same fader levels as the mix that you just heard, but they are all phase corrected in the sense the phases flipped on a couple of mics so that all the drums are in phase, and that is really important.
Yeah, and we're gonna dive into that into
Yeah.
a little more depth right after these bunch of videos. And we're almost at the
Yeah,
end
yeah.
of it. So let's just give you one more sample. Like I said, this is all the drums raw. By raw, I mean without, like I said, just gain staged and phase aligned and all of that. And now let's just give you a full mix from the same point. Just go back to raw. Somewhere here maybe. And go back to full. All right, amazing. Gotta have that now nice loud big fill to end the groove, right? So if you guys could hear that, all right, you could hear everything and everything works. Can someone in the chat just give us a thumbs up and just let us know, so we know you guys are hearing? That was our first test, so we know everything was fine from our end and all of that. But apart from that, so that was, like I said, our first sort of exhibit that we wanted to show you. And now let's kind of talk about this a little bit, Anupam. So let's go through this process. What did we do? All right, cool. We've got some thumbs ups. Thank you, guys.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Great. All right. So let's start off with you. We mentioned the word phase. I didn't understand what phase was for a very long time. I couldn't
neither
hear
did
the
I.
difference. And then I found out later a lot of engineers also like would were just sort of like eyeballing it or earballing it or whatever, like, you know. But do you want to just throw some light in, I mean, without really making this a half an hour conversation and tutorial about what phasing is, in its most basic essence, what exactly is phase? What should drummers be looking out for when they're looking into phase? So yeah.
So okay, so to cut a very long conversation,
I know.
as sankshipt as we can make it, is that since your stickings phase only comes into play with two or more mics. If you're using one mic to capture something, there is no phase to worry about. You're good, you're gold. But when you're using two or more mics, there is a phase relation. So, for example, if these are two mics and I'm miking my voice like so, now if one of the mics is offset, it is capturing the sound wave at a particular time. The other mic is capturing the sound wave at a different time. So that is time and phase. And if you angle it, your phase will get mucked up. So you want to get as clean a phase into your drum mics as possible. We try and ensure this by measuring things out. So, for example,
Yeah.
our overheads are measured equidistant from the snare.
Yeah. With a
That
measuring
tends to
tape.
work
Yeah.
with a measuring tape or with a cable or
You
something.
can
Just
even use
feel,
the old school sticks where you place
yeah.
sticks together and kind of line it, but using a measuring tape is way more
Again,
accurate.
this may not be perfect. I'm sure there are better ways to go about it, but
Yeah.
this works and
Yeah.
this works reasonably well. The other thing is that the minute you stick in, say, a snare mic into the picture and your overheads, you have to keep checking for the phase relation. How we did this was to cut it really short. You put your overhead faders up, you pan your overheads left, right, hard left, right. So you have panned overheads. Now this is easier if you use just one overhead to begin with,
Yep.
assuming both your overheads are in phase. So you pull up your snare fader. After you pull up your snare fader, you hear for if while you are pulling up the fader, is it adding the snare or is it subtracting the snare?
By adding,
So
just want to cut you. By adding and subtracting, what do you mean? Like, are
volume,
you, yeah,
straight up volume.
volume or
That is
body
step
or
one.
yeah, volume.
Volume
Yeah.
is step one. So
Yeah.
you will find in most situations we have to flip snare top.
Yeah.
So that is what I tend to do live in most situations. So what that does is when you pull your snare fader up, you will find that the body goes away a little bit
Right.
from the snare. Or if you solo the snare top mic and then you pull up the overheads, you will find that it's robbing the body. And you flip the phase and you will hear it's a much bigger sound. So the easiest way to make sure that your drums are in phase is always go for the bigger sound. The bigger, more focused sound. If you hear the sound smearing,
Yeah.
like in Hindi you will say "फैल जा रहा है," then that is the sound you need to avoid. At least for me, I avoid that.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's very hard to tell. You're like, am I hearing this right? So then placebo comes into play. In which case, just do a blind test and just stop where you like it.
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
That's the
So,
best.
like I said, this is a very detailed subject, and this is something, like I said, like I've heard the phrase phase so many times, and it's always been something that's intimidating, or like, I hope my drums are in phase. I've heard engineers complain about, oh, their drums aren't in phase, and it's always something to worry about, but it's not as hard to figure out. Is what we learned, is what I learned, at least in this process, doing this by myself. It's like Anupam said, you start listening from top up from your overheads and keep soloing one mic at a time in relation to that, and then start listening for if certain sounds are smearing or like kind of spreading and not sounding as realistic, or as like what you'd imagine it would sound like. And you can start from there. But then again, like I said, this is such a deep topic, and for more on all of this, obviously there's the third session. This is, like I said, purely just about the mics and all of that. But the third session will be purely diving into a lot of the recording tips and tricks that we're going to be focusing on: the EQing, the leveling, the mixing, mastering, and all of that. Cool.
Sorry, there's a legitimate concern here where a panelist has asked if we can explain it in Hindi. Well, first of all, I don't know any of the technical terms in Hindi,
Yeah,
so
I
I
would
won't be
really
doing
struggle.
justice to it. I would
Apo-
really struggle doing this in Hindi.
yeah,
So my apologies for that, but I think we'll be conducting most of this particular workshop in English. We will try and do a Hindi version later for you, if it's possible.
if
If
it's
we can,
possible. I
if we
mean,
can
let's see. Yeah,
figure it out.
we'll speak to the guys and we'll figure this out. But for now, apologies. Like,
Casual conversation तो हो
yeah,
जाता है, but
I
technical
don't feel I
conversation में
would.
थोड़ा मार.
Yeah, exactly. I don't feel I'd be able to articulate or explain things to the kind of detail that I
Yeah.
would. So, apologies. Like I said, hopefully the next session. Thank you, Ankita. Yeah. All right. So, coming back to setup A and beat one. So now you've heard basically the raw mix. You've heard what the kick drum sounds like soloed. You've heard what the kick overhead and the snare sounds like, what just the room sounds like, and what the entire mix sounds like. So just you want to, if you let's just go by this one by one. All right. So Anupam, in the raw phase, like
Mhm.
when we were actually listening to drums at, let's say, gain staging stage. All right, at the stage where we're going to be setting our gains, what are things to keep in mind apart from the usual of don't let a mic clip? And are there any
Mhm.
misconceptions with that? Because I'm a loud drummer, I've clipped a
Yeah.
lot of mics.
Mm-hmm.
and we've recorded a lot of albums with, probably a lot of
I
snare
think
hits clipped, most of the snare
so.
hits clipped. So
So
just throw some
with
light on that.
modern, so with many modern converters, there is a headroom above your clip level before
Yeah.
your converter clips. You don't want your converter clipping. That's an
Yes.
ugly sound.
Yeah.
Traditionally, when you recorded analog, everybody clipped their snare mic a wee bit.
Yeah.
I used to do it with analog boards, like the red light used to just flash on and the vendors used to hit me for it, but it sounds really good. But the point is that you don't want that happening because converter clipping is bad news. You have another problem to deal with, which is sometimes a condenser mic diaphragm clipping at the mic end. So your preamp might be sorted, but you give a loud whack. It happened with the 914, if you remember,
Absolutely. Yeah.
which we
During
used
during
previously.
the during the Man album, where we
I
used
think
two
during
mics on the
Man, yeah,
snare.
we used two mics
Yeah.
on the snare, and the
And
914 had a couple of dead hits,
yeah.
and that's you can't save that. It just sounds, and it's happened with a bunch of other engineers also with specifically a pencil condenser on a snare.
Yeah.
So you want to look at the SPL rating of your microphones that you're using. So the mic itself should be able to handle, especially when you have a drummer like Rahul, who is wait now. You want fairly robust mics with a high SPL rating. That is step one.
Right.
Step two is when you're gain staging for converters, I try to keep like your loudest hit, like absolutely you've dug in.
Yeah.
And the best way to check is just hit your kick, snare, and cymbal all at the same time.
Yeah. Yeah.
And your individual mics should not be crossing, your closed mics should not be crossing, should be within a range of -6 to -3. If 0 dB is peak and
Yeah.
clip, then -6 to -3 is a good range to have. You are also maximizing on converter efficiency in terms of bit depth,
Yeah.
and that is where your preamp also sounds the best. That's a sweet spot. uh, what we did was that we, for example, we got our close mic level set so that you got your kick, snare, and tom sounding equal, which is how we do it live, and then we kind of blended in the room mic with the fader at 0 dB and our gain knobs dictating the level. So we got a proper mix going from the word go. So
Yeah.
gain staging does is gain staging makes sure that that's your first step in your mix, and if you can nail your mix at gain staging, you have won half the battle.
Yeah, and that's a lesson I've learned in this entire exercise as well. The I mean, we've always paid a lot of emphasis on gain staging, and sound checks take very long sometimes just to get gain. I mean, in a studio environment, because we're always ensuring like things aren't too hot or too soft. The kind
Yeah.
of
Too
sound.
soft is also a problem, by the way. I've seen many
Exactly.
engineers veer because they're scared, so they will follow the -18 rule, which is
Yeah.
that you keep your levels at peaking at -18 dB. That's a bad idea because and that's a bad idea for a very simple reason that your converters have a bit depth, which gets keeps going lower the lower you go in level.
Yeah.
So keep your levels up on the top yellow spectrum if you're looking at colors.
And the drums are a loud instrument. Let's let's
They are a
let's
loud
face that.
instrument, man.
So you want them to bloom. You want them to kind of have that impact. So that's why the -6 to -3 dB
Yeah.
sort of range is what sits
For close
comfortably
mics,
for close
I
mics. For
want to
close mics,
reiterate
yeah,
for
yeah.
close
We're
mics.
talking about close mics here. Yeah, absolutely. That's it. And what about overheads and how do you go about gain? I mean, what are you looking for in this particular test that we did? I mean, we were really fortunate. First of all, we had these amazing overheads that we
Yeah,
didn't
man.
have to do much to. But there are also situations where you have all different kinds of overheads. So
Yeah.
what do you have to keep in mind when you're kind of gain staging or just uh, trying to solo your overheads, and what are you looking for in
So again,
in a
Rahul,
drum kit?
I will draw your attention to when we were testing the overheads, we had dialed them in way too hot to begin with,
Yes, yes,
if you
initially.
remember. And
Yes.
it's easy to do that because overheads are less peaky than your close mics. So there is a tendency to drive the gains on them slightly hotter if you're looking just at meters. So you have to hear for it
Yeah.
and not just look at the meters. Uh, a typical like on an analog console, for example, to give an idea, because I have this set metering thing in my head, where if your drums are peaking at, say, if your clip is at plus 16 dB and your kick and snare are peaking at plus 12, the overheads tend to sit at around between 0 to 6.
All
So
right.
roughly about you can safely say that dialing them in with a 6 to 10 dB less peak level than your close mics is a good starting point.
Right. Awesome. Awesome.
Again, there are no rules. You can
Y-
go the other way around. You can
exactly. Yeah. I mean, trust your ears at the end of it.
trust
That's
your
that's
ears.
that's 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 a very important key. Like, I mean, all of these numbers and all these facts are true. I
Yeah.
mean, they're good
Don't
starting
go by the
points.
numbers,
Yeah,
please.
they're good starting points
There
to
are
at
no
least
absolute
gauge
numbers.
where you're at. But then again, it boils down to, like we said, so many different factors. The way you're hitting the cymbals, how loud you're hitting them, how soft you're hitting them, all of that can play a factor. So use your ears, but you can use these sort of markers just as a starting point and then
Yeah.
figure out where you want to go from there, if you want to go up or down. Right.
Just don't clip your converter.
Just, yeah, don't clip your converters. That's the most important thing, right? So, when we played back the raw and the final mix sound, okay, I'm sure the all the attendees and the participants over here, they would have clearly heard a difference in kind of how the raw drums just sounded. No, I wouldn't use the word flat, but it's just gain stage. You can hear each drum for what it is. But then suddenly, when you actually mixed and you hear the full mix, then you hear things blooming. You hear certain things. What what are things you keep in mind, like when you hear raw drums first? Do you already have an idea of, okay, this is what this sounds like, and this is what I could make this sound like? What is that thought process like for you?
So the general rule of thumb, if you hear the raw drums, you can kind of wing them to work in a mix sort of.
Yeah.
But the point is that you need to make sure that your raw capture is sounding legit,
Yeah.
and you can't have a wheel fixing in the mix attitude, because you can do stuff like sample replacement, etc. That's a different topic. But typically, the good rule of thumb is make sure it sounds good when you pull the fader up without anything.
Yeah.
I have a plan always, because now it's safe to say that I have some experience with drums, and I'm quite obsessive about them.
Yeah.
So I always have a plan, and I EQ very differently from the way other people EQ. So I'm hearing for certain things which I can't articulate, to be honest with you, but that's the way I hear it. So you have to figure out your own method to the madness, and initially take it easy with the EQ and avoid compression, because that's a like you will hear between the raw and the full mix, there is a ton of compression in the drums, and what that basically does effectively is give you a more defined attack, and
Yeah.
it brings everything up. So the
Yeah.
room reflections come up,
Yeah.
while it just squashes your entire dynamic range, right? So it kind of makes everything sound more lively, and that's how you hear.
Right. Right.
Uh, so be wary the compressor to start with. Just try and get EQ and fader levels to dictate how your drums sound, and that should get your flavor in a very big ballpark.
Right. Awesome. So just for everyone again, I'm just gonna share my screen one more time, and we're just gonna go through basically both the raw sound and the full mix just one more time for you to hear. So this is the raw. I'm gonna play this for about 30 seconds maybe.
As you can hear, this is already a very complete drum sound to begin with, and this is just faders.
Yeah, this is just the faders that we have here. Yep. And okay, let me just now toggle to the full mix, and let me just move it up a little. So you can clearly hear the snare pops out so much more. The cymbals just sound so much more lush in this.
You will find the cymbals have more sustain.
Yeah, nice. Yeah,
Yeah.
bloom and sustain. Absolutely. So yeah, I hope that was sort of setup A and beat one, and what we did with it. Let me just go to the Q&A section and see if there's anything pertinent to this for now. Okay, not so far. There are some questions. Akash, I see your question. We'll get to that, like I said, at the end. But if you have any questions pertinent to this particular section, like I said, label it and send it in the Q&A, and we will address it later on. Like I said, let me just screen share this one more time. And we actually will get to this test later. I have lined this up for later as part of our second test. So we'll do that when we compare room mics basically. But that was set A, and that was beat one. That was just me playing the same beat with all the sort of permutations and combinations in terms of soloing mics with just kick snare overhead and all of that, and then just the kick and all of that. Yeah, sorry, just got distracted by the chat here. Is there a YouTube channel or any contact platform like Instagram for this? I do believe all this information will be going up onto YouTube at some point. So just keep watching the Sennheiser India page, and you'll see all that information pop up over there.
Sorry, guys. I just want to say, please direct all your questions to the Q&A section,
Yes.
and let's try and not keep them in the chat, because we will completely lose them.
Right. And just one, Lito Boni has a question, really quick question. It's about EQing and compression. So like I said, for more information about EQing, compression, and that entire process, We'll dive really deep into that in our third session, which is on the 6th.
Yeah.
This session is purely just about capturing the drums and things you need to keep in mind, techniques for that. And the third part is going to be taking this information and then moving it into a DAW, and that's where Anupam will be highlighting everything that he does in terms of how you use the compression, how you use all these multiple effects that he has, and all of that, right? So that's for the later call. We'll leave stuff to just pertinent to basically stuff over here.
Answer Lito's question really quickly. No, we don't record with ambient compression.
Okay, cool. So then there we go. Okay, cool. So now basically we're going to move to, oh, sorry, just give me 1 second here. Let me screen share again. What we're going to be doing is we're going to be moving to basically the same set. But what we've done is we've now placed this mic in the rejection phase. So let's go through again, like I said, the mics that we've used. This is the 902 on the out, and there's the 901 inside that you can't see. You can see the cable running here, but it's not there. There's another hack for that. We'll get to that in a second. This MD421 again on the snare. This is the first time I've used a 421 so extensively on a snare. Really, really, really sounded awesome. Again, the 904 on our rack tom, as well as our flow tom, which you will see popping up in a second. And we didn't change the positions of these mics kind of through setup A and B. They stayed where they were, pointing at the center of the drums. Again, trying to capture low end in the case of this flow tom, as much low end as possible. We'll get into rejection and all of that in a bit. But anyway, again, we've used the KM184s as our overheads in this case for this session. And coming up is basically, we've used an E914. This is the first time this mic's making a feature in our session here as a room mic. And as you can see, it's facing the wall here. It's not facing the drum kit. It's actually pointing away from the drum kit, against the drum kit. All right. So that's that. Now let's get into basically a raw mix of beat 2 from setup A. So if you want to note this down, like I said, this is setup A, beat 2 with the mic in rejection. Right. So here we go. This is what the raw drums sound like. Right, quickly moving on. This is just the kick, snare, and overheads. Yeah. All right, and now moving on. This is just the room mic soloed. Right, great. And finally, let's just show you a full mix. I'm going to play this through and through so you can hear everything. Yeah, so I think you guys get the idea with that, right? So let me just stop my screen share. All right, cool. So if all of you must have heard all of that. So like I said, this was again setup B, set A, but beat 2. And we kind of used all our close-in mics are the same. The only difference in this case was, and our overheads were the same. We've used the KM184s. But the only thing we changed in this was the room mic and rejection. And I also want to kind of emphasize the angle that you saw. Let me just pull this up one more time just so we can just see this, right? So this is the room mic. This wasn't the angle that the room mic was in. This is just to give you a sort of visual and audio representation, which is how we edited this. But the room mic was, if this is dead center, it was actually, if you can see this China symbol here, it was closer to that side facing the wall, but kind of in line with, we drew a line straight from there towards the snare, kind of in between this right symbol pointing at the snare, but in the other direction. So just so we're clear, this isn't exactly where the room mic was placed. It was a little to the left of this from where you are watching it on your screen and facing the wall. So yeah, Anupam, what were your thoughts on this round? Testing the room mic in this rejection mode. What were the? I mean, I have a video that I'm going to play where everyone can even hear the difference between what the room mic sounded like while it was facing the kit as opposed to rejection. But what are the key differences that you could like pinpoint on right away, like when you heard
So I remember when you were recording this and when we were talking about, okay, this is where we're placing the mics, how are we going about it? This was kind of to be clear, this was something that I had heard the Forrester Saville do for the Carnival album, and where he pointed the mics in the walls as opposed to at the kit. And I was like, man, for such a small room, we should try this because. And this was, of course, before hearing. So this was in the theory stage of the entire process. And I think for such a small room, the rejection makes sense because you get more of, and what I hear specifically when I was mixing it and why I liked it so much was because it makes the drums shine a little bit more. You get a larger sense of space, and you get a free reverb.
Yeah, you get free verb, exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, another word that comes to mind is compared to, I mean, you guys will hear this yourself. I felt for some reason this rejection position kind of sounded richer. For some reason, the room just sounded slightly richer than while it was facing. And while the with the room mic facing is definitely a sound that's totally usable, was quite
It's very nice and
focused,
tight. It's
very nice and tight, very focused. This was just richer. I don't know. That's the only way I could describe it. I just
more expensive.
more expensive, exactly. And yeah, if that makes any sense. Yeah, that was it. It definitely sounded like that. I'm gonna pull up my screen again over here because I want to now exhibit basically what we've done with these rooms. All right. So, all right. This is, let's just actually, before we do that, okay, let's do this first and then we can go to the full mix and the raw mix. Or should we do a full and raw comparison first and then
Nee,
go
pehla
over-
room, let's do the rooms first and then
All
we
right,
go for
cool.
the full and raw.
So this is the 906 facing the room.
Here the snare tail in particular. I just
Yeah.
want to say that whoever's there, just hear the snare tail and the close mic tails in particular.
Right, here we go. Okay, and I'm gonna switch now. This is in rejection, the 914. Just gonna toggle back and play this from here somewhere. This is facing the room again, the 906. You can hear those toms there. And again from sort of the same point. Right. So hopefully you would have you guys listening would have heard the difference there. I could really tell the difference, like you said, in the snare. It was such a, I mean, noticeable difference for me. I kind of preferred the rejection snare sound, just general kit sound, as opposed to the facing for this experiment, for this particular experiment. So yeah, any more light you want to throw on this, Anupam? Anything else people should be listening out for while they were, I mean, things that they should have been listening out to while they were listening to this?
Just generally how the, like, when you're recording a drum kit in a room, the drum, you cannot separate the drum kit from the space.
Yeah.
Like when, for example, when we do concerts and we're doing it in a big hall, which is like, it's got a 6-second reverb.
Yeah.
your kit sounds completely different than what it will sound in an open air festival kind of situation.
Absolutely.
So in a studio, your drum kit is married to the space, and in this particular instant, what better way to capture the space than just point the mic at the space, not at the kit. So
Yeah.
I just had a wild thought where I would, if we had more channels, I would probably place two mics like that, and probably point one at the kit and one away from the kit, and then choose later in post.
Yeah. That's
Yeah.
if you have the channels, if you have the headroom, I mean the bandwidth to actually plug in more stuff, by all means, yeah. That's that would
Please
have
do,
been
please
great if we
experiment.
did that in this test. If we actually had all the mics set up in one position, just hit record and
Yeah.
captured everything, and then all did all these. But
To
we
be fair,
actually,
this is the first time I've actually used this in an album, and I think to myself, why haven't I done this before? But
well, there's always a first time. I'm glad we got to
yeah,
do this at least now and
yeah,
learn
man,
that. So
that was good.
yeah, so I mean, just to outline, that was basically setup A, beat 2. Uh, Let me just go back and see if there's anything I missed here. One second, Anupam, just give me a second here.
Yeah, yeah, please.
Uh, I think we didn't compare what the raw sound
We
and
didn't
the
compare with the raw
yeah.
and the mix. Yeah.
So let's do that. Let me just share my screen. Give me 1 second here. Right. Okay. So this is what the drums sound like raw. I'm gonna quickly toggle now.
Rahul, sorry.
Yeah.
Before you play this, do you
Yes.
want to play the raw mix for the 906 facing the kit,
Yeah.
just to give a perspective?
Yeah, sure. So this is the raw mix of the 906 facing the kit. It's a different groove though, but you'll get the same idea. Oh,
Okay. Can we go back to the 906? Sorry, the 914 raw
the 9
rejection raw.
rejection raw,
raw.
right? Here we
Yeah.
go. Oh, raw. I'm so sorry. Give me
Raw,
one
raw,
second.
raw.
So sorry. That's what this sounds like.
I mean, I guess in the raw mix itself, you can hear that there is a greater sense of space
Yeah,
in the kit
absolutely.
already.
Yeah. So I wanted to just do one more test where in this beat 2 we show you the difference between the raw mix
Yes,
and a
please.
full mix. So this is the raw setup A beat 2. Let me just forward it a little. And let's hear what the full mix sounds like. Right. So that should give you guys a good idea of the difference between when you first record drums, what it sounds like, and what it can sound like after you spend the time mixing it, EQing it, and doing your adding that extra sauce into the mix. So yeah, any thoughts, any suggestions, Anupam? I mean, any additions to this so far? What
No,
we have going on,
I think we're good. We can move
right?
on.
I'm just gonna just look at the chat for 1 second to see what's going on, just to see if there's any problems here. No, okay, cool. We're fine, and we have a few more questions I can see. Nice. Okay, just keep them all rolling in. Like I said, that what we did was set up A beat 2, and that's like I said, using the same overheads, all the same close-in mics. The only thing that changed here was the room mic, and we played the difference of both those room mics for you also. All right, cool. We're going to be moving on to basically our next part, which is basically setup B. And we've only done one groove here. And I mean, we did two, but we selected this one to exhibit to you. Let me just dive into it straight away. And at least let me just show what mics we use, how we set them up. And then we can start with there. So this is we sort of went with the same kick drum configuration, the 902 on outside and the 901 inside. We'll talk about where we place that in mic because you can't see it here. We'll just kind of give you a idea. Again, the 421 in exactly the same position. We tried moving it further away, changed the angle, but this was kind of where we landed on, where it sounded the best, we thought. Again, the 904s on both our toms. Again, like we said, the MD421 is a phenomenal mic on toms. And if we definitely would, I mean, we have done this in the past, and for this session we would have too, but it just seemed better on the snare. The 904, again, like I said, on the flow tom, capturing all that low end. And here we have our E914s 904, sorry, over there. This is our 914.
914.
Yep, on our overheads. Uh, Sort of in the same position as where very, very slight difference on kind of how we space them as opposed to what we do with the KM 184s. That didn't change too much. And then finally, this is what we did. We had the E906 again in rejection. If you can see my cursor, that's the back of the mic. This mic clearly has a label on the front that says front. So this was the mic in rejection. And you can see over here again with the cursor, there are these 3 different modes. We've left on the flat mode just to kind of give you a flat representation of what it sounds like. So that's the 906 again facing in rejection. All right. So kind of let's dive into straight away what these takes sound like, okay? And before I start, oh, it already started there. Before I start, I'd like to tell you the first couple of grooves were sort of more up tempo in that kind of 100, maybe 110, 20 BPM, whatever. Like just to put it into perspective. This is a slower groove. This is me actually digging into the snare more. So just to give you another perspective of what another kind of groove would sound like. With the same close mics, the overheads are different here. So let's hear what this sounds like raw first. Yeah, so you get an idea of the groove. Okay, moving on. This is just the kick. Alright, moving on. This is kick, snare and overheads. Just want to point out, you can still hear the toms. Spot mics aren't on in this. It is definitely an option, a usable option for different styles of music for sure. But yeah, this is.
I would place the mic slightly differently, Rahul. If I didn't have spot mics on the toms,
yeah,
I would have
exactly.
placed the mic slightly differently, and that does get you a reasonable amount of bottom end, and then you push some with the EQ.
Slightly closer in, you mean? Like, I mean,
yeah,
closer?
like more of that recorder mind kind of technique.
Yeah. So okay, let's dive into that a little more, and we can also touch upon that a little more, like different kinds of overhead miking techniques that you could do for different combinations. So just to give you, put it back into perspective, this is kick, snare and overheads. All right. This is just the room mic. Again, just to highlight, in the previous round, we had the 914 in rejection, and this time we have the 906 in rejection, in the same position where the 914 was. So, all right, that should give you an idea of what that sounds like.
Sorry, Rahul, I just want to add one thing real quick.
Yep, absolutely.
Just so that we can hear the character of the mics or the differences in characters of the mics more clearly, I have kept the processing the same across microphones. So
right.
I have gain matched them, but I have run the channels through a group, and if I remember correctly, I did not correct any of the mic channels. I did initially, but then I reversed it.
Yeah.
Because I wanted not the mix to shine, but the mic character to shine. And so that so that it's a learning experience for all of us, that what difference, given the same variables, does the change in mic do?
Absolutely.
And it's very rare that we get the chance to do an experiment like this. So,
right.
Moving on.
Yeah, no, moving on, just again to... Nice over there. All right, and now this is the full mix. I'm just going to let this play out. right. I'm going to stop my screen share now. Awesome. So I believe all of you would have heard all those options. So just to refresh again, we basically heard that in its raw sound, basic with the raw mix, with basically no processing on it. We heard kick snare overheads. We heard the room. We also heard kick. Sorry, we heard a kick solo over there, and we also heard the full mix, which was the last version that you heard. So again, what were our findings? What was the most noticeable finding? Straight away to compare, what are the kind of differences someone can expect if you had the budget and you could buy the KM 184s. I mean, like we've mentioned before, they aren't cheap mics. They're extremely expensive mics, and they're in the higher range of scheme of things for sure. But the 914s are definitely
Very
mics you can
competent mics.
consider. They
Very
they
competent
they
mics.
hold their own really well, even compared to these 184s. And you could hear the detail on this. So why don't you throw some light from after I sent you these files? What were the kind of differences, the stark differences, or the similarities you started hearing between these different sets of overheads?
For me, the biggest difference between the 914s and the 184s was the mid-range content.
Yep.
The 184s have a fantastic, very even mid-range content. They're almost, you can say, they're kind of like very flat sounding while being very warm. The top end isn't too harsh, and everything sounds ready to go.
Yep.
On the 914s, because they're designed to be used more live, so they have a bit of top end excitement,
Yep.
which worked really nicely for the room.
Yep.
On the overage, it tends to be a bit too much for my taste. So if I'm using these mics live, I will cut a little bit of tops and
Yep.
possibly boost some mids. And otherwise the 914s also have a slightly compressed character, almost I'd like to say, uh, where they don't sound like a traditional pencil condenser microphone, which is like very focused and you don't get a lot of mid-range content. These have a fantastic, they do a fantastic job of capturing the entire kit. So as a holistic capture of your kit, which is how I have started looking at overheads now, as opposed to simple spot mics, they work, man. I mean, you can hear it.
Yeah, and I mean, what we also did, and you'll see later on, is we kind of tested it out on a snare. We've tested it out on different sources to record. The 914, just for your information, is also a great mic to use on your hi hats. If you have the channels and you want to point a mic at your hi hat to kind of record all that hi hat articulation, the 914 is a great option for that. Most definitely overheads. I mean, that's as you heard. Uh, it didn't take away anything from the mix. The mix still sounded great. I mean, you could still hear everything. Just the spread of the kit was nice and wide, all of that. And those are things I'm usually listening for when I'm listening to overheads. I just want to hear everything in my kit nice and even. I don't want to hear certain things kind of ducking out or highlighted a little too much. As long as it's nice and even, the 914s really came through with that as well. So yeah.
I just want to add that I have used the 914s a lot in a live scenario on tablas.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Tell us more about
and
that. Yeah, what are the yeah,
yeah, so the top end, because of, I mean, while they are not as rich in their mid range as 184s, and I think that's where the 184 shines, where it gives you more detail per mic, so
yep,
to say.
yep,
But the 914s are no slouch. They sound great on the tabla, better than the usual dynamic cardioid options you might want to have.
right,
And they give you that, when you play the tabla, your finger slides on the skin, and that's a very important detail that a lot of people tend to miss out. And that like it pops out, man.
yeah,
So it's a
yeah,
much
yeah,
more engaging tabla sound, and I mean, you feel at the end of the day, it's a better representation of the tabla player's performance,
right,
and
right,
it
right.
really gets all the little finger motions and
All
the detail out. Very nice. I like it.
nice, nice. Yeah, like we said. So, any other Indian percussions have you ever used, or just other percussion instruments you ever used this on, or
No, yeah, I've only used them on tablas.
all right, cool, cool, cool. So again, like we said, that was. If you have any questions about this setup, and if you have any questions about how, I mean, if you want to hear anything back again, you can actually put that in the chat. If there's anything you want to hear again, like if you want to hear the raw sound, if I can you please be both mics rejection? Someone's asked. Just give me 1 second. Only room mics. All right. Yeah, just give me 1 second. That's coming up. Yeah. Let me just share my screen. So, oops, sorry. While oh, wow, it's opened up Google Maps for me. That's amazing.
Mm.
All right. Right. So here we are, and we're going to show you basically both the rooms, right? So this is the 906 facing the room and 906 in
No,
rejection.
I think he wants to hear the 906 rejection room.
Oh, okay. All right. All
I
right.
think he wants to hear the 906 versus the 914, both in rejection.
All right. So basically, that's this over here. This is the 906. Let this play out for a while. All right. And let's hear this.
Sorry, Rahul, just pause that for a second.
Yeah.
I just want to make a small correction. The previous one was, I think, the 914, and this is the 906.
Yeah, you're absolutely right, Anupam. My bad. I lined up the videos wrong again over here.
No
Yeah.
access, no access.
Yeah. So sorry, just to correct again. Yeah, Anupam is right. This is the 906. The previous one was the 904. If you want, I can toggle back and play that after this.
914, and we can toggle it.
Yeah. This is the 906 again in rejection. Right. And this is the 904. Sorry, 906.
914.
Oh, I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
So I hope that you could hear what you needed over there. Yeah, I actually stuck to an order, and now that I've jumbled up the order, I got a little confused there. So apologies. But yeah, so that was, like I said, our setup B and the beat one that we played, and all the different combinations we use. Like we said, and just to bring this topic into just a little more focus, we left the mics in a sort of safe position while we did experiment a lot, and we found lots of interesting pockets in the room where we can place mics and do things. We kind of left this as a straight up simple setup, which is something you would do if you're doing this for the first time, or if you're not familiar with doing this and you want to just start off. These are sort of positions that these are safe mic positions, so to say. And that's kind of where we were with this experiment. And we wanted to just show you, with just a few modifications here and there, you can get all these different permutations and combinations of sounds. And obviously, once you have captured all this right, there's so much more you can do in the EQ, like I said, which is our next part on the 6th that we will really dive into greater depth. Is there anything else you want to add to this, Anupam? Anything else, or should we move on to the next section, which I think is personally my favorite section, and I'm really glad we did this.
Yeah, that was all Rahul's idea, I must say, and I was very excited to hear that section as well.
Right. So
I just want to add.
Yeah.
I'm so sorry. I just want to add that if you are going to be using a room mic, there was one thing that completely skipped my mind, and that was that you should measure the distance between your room mic and your two overheads, and
Right.
your room mic should be equidistant from both the overheads.
Right.
So something to keep in mind when you're placing. You can in turn triangulate this in a far more complex manner and keep a similar ratio between your snare, overheads, and room. Blah blah. You can go to town on this, but
Can you
basic
elaborate
rule
a
of
little more on the sort of the triangulation? Does it have to be a sort of equilateral triangle? Like, does it have to be
even no, yeah,
absolutely?
even my maths is a little weak on this.
No, I mean,
So
no.
the
What I
deal
mean is, does it have to be absolutely even, like the same angles
so
with each other,
so
or
the
it
deal
can
is
kind of
that
be?
you wanted to, like, the distance that your snare mic is from the overheads.
Yeah.
So you want to maintain that kind of ratio. So when you, as you distance your mics, your room mic from your overhead and snare, you want to kind of have a similar kind of distance so that it doesn't mess up your phase. I'm guessing.
Right. Right.
As I said,
And
my maths are weak on that front, but
right. And
a
also, I
good
mean, yeah. Sorry. So you were saying.
a good starting point is just to make sure that if you're using a single room mic, it's equidistant from both the overheads. If you're using a stereo room mic, all the best. Let me know how that goes.
Yeah, that poses its share of problems.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, definitely something you can work around. Start with one mic, start understanding what that sounds like, then add in that second room mic, and then see what they sound like. And
But yeah, again, so even if you're using a stereo mic setup, so then in that case, make sure the distance between your left to overhead and your right to overhead right mics are the same.
right. I wanted to touch upon something which was something that we showcased in this particular set, which was set B, and just want to I wanted to throw some light on it. We spoke about, because uh, the kind of groove that I was playing, and when we just did kick, snare, and overheads, which were just essentially four mics. Let's say in our case it was five because we had two kicks. But let's say for someone who has just one kick drum mic, it's one kick drum, one snare mic, and two overheads on top. What are the different kind of overhead positions you can even consider? Like you mentioned, recorder man, which
So
is
Recorder Man is a very popular one, and that's we used a variant of that on the Red album, I believe.
yeah, correct.
Where and we've used it a lot of times in the studio because the Recorder Man gives you a very nice and a phase accurate what do you call it, placement of your overhead mics,
Yeah,
because you measure the distance, you triangulate the distance between your snare, your kick, and your overhead, and there is a way to go about this. There are tons
yeah.
of tutorials online who can explain it far better than I can,
I
but
mean,
the
but
idea
just
is that
a rule of thumb, right? Yeah,
rule of thumb to start with, that you need to have the same distance between your snare, kick, and let's say center overhead and your right overhead. So it's not exactly a left and right setup.
exactly. That's
You
what I
don't
was
even
getting.
pan them. You don't even pan them hard right. You pan them like about ye much.
Yeah,
Like
exactly. So just, I mean, just to put it into perspective again, you kind of have one overhead kind of above your snare, which is
yeah, bang above your
capturing
snare.
bang above your snare, and the other one is kind of where your flow tom is if you're a right-handed drummer,
Uh,
towards
near your right shoulder.
or right shoulder. Right. All right. Okay. Because yeah, and what happens? Let's say if you're a louder drummer, does that go higher or
So
wider
in
apart?
your case, what I had to do, I had to the standard trick is that you use two stick lengths,
Yeah.
but two stick lengths was too short because your stick was hitting the mic, or like
And
when you were going to
the
your
mics were
China,
just quite hot, basically.
they
Also.
were quite hot also. But I mean, so you can use the same ratio and lengthen the difference,
Yeah.
and it works. It's a really, it's a great go-to setup for, say, sorry, a jazz rig,
Yeah.
where and it does a very flat capture of your mics, and you can get away with using just those two mics and a kick mic. You don't even need a snare spot mic.
Exactly. Yeah. So to anyone listening, and this is again another sort of demystifying tip. You don't really need eight mics to get a good drum sound. I mean, you can work with four. You can work with one mic, two mics. I mean, all these experiments and tests have been done before. It just depends on what the nature of the job is at hand. If it's, what kind of recording is it, and all of that, and all of that just plays a factor. But if you have to, this can be done with four mics as well, and you can get some pretty awesome results.
For
All right.
those who want to try this at home with a single mic,
Yeah.
so the recorder man is your bang on top of the snare like this. Just move the mic back a little bit along the axis of your head so that it points a little bit towards the kick, and you can sort of make it work.
Yeah. Awesome.
Ish.
Awesome. On the chat, Aditya has a question, which is basically asking what mic have we used on the kick. So as you saw those the B-roll videos that we showed you, we actually showed you the 902, which was on the kick out. That's still on my stand plugged into my kick drum over there. But we couldn't show you this mic because, like I said, this was kind of in the bass drum sitting on my padding. But just for everyone out there, this is the 901. This is the kick in mic. This is the condenser mic, so you need to phantom power this. Whereas the 902 is the dynamic mic. You just plug in, good to go. But for this, you need phantom power. So just a couple of things to note. But let's say, uh, if I had to give you an example, if this is the bass drum, if this was my bass drum, just, I mean, I've scaled it down obviously for now. It's 22 by 16 inches in depth is what my thing is. So I wouldn't know exactly in inches where it was, but a good place to start is sort of a halfway point. I mean, if you kind of leave it in the halfway point and that's your batter head and that's your reso head, this is a good place to start. The more you move it in, you start getting more of that beater attack, and the 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 beater hitting the skin. Kind of you get that click, 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 that kind of sound over there. And if you move it away, you start getting more other frequencies, more low end, and all of that. But this is a great mic, definitely to help enhance your kick drum sound. You can do the same with one mic. Obviously, it works great. I mean, there have been multiple sessions that I've played on where it's just been one kick drum mic. But I know you're a metal guy, and when you play metal, you really when you want to record a lot of metal, you want that kick drum articulation. You want that kick drum to really sit in a mix and be punchy. And this kind of adds the punch to that. That little, it just reinforces it a lot more. Anything you want to add to this, Anupam?
This is my most important mic in the entire kit, which is kick
Absolutely.
in. Mostly because the way I tend to place it is, if this is your kick drum, this is the batter head, this is the reso head. I'll try and place it not too close to the skin, because then you lose out on some low end, and I'll place it slightly closer to the reso head.
Yeah.
So what tends to happen is that you get fantastic articulation from your beater, and you can push quite a bit of top end without getting too much cymbal bleed into play. And when you're working with drums, it's all about managing cymbal bleed.
Right.
Uh,
That's a big
and
topic. Let's touch upon that also in a bit. Yeah.
yeah, man. So the biggest difference I find between an out mic and an in mic is that the bottom end is way quicker. So when you push that channel up on a big PA, for example, which has a lot of subs, uh, the the bottom end is so controlled, and at the same time, once you get it, it's like so but it's at the same time it's a big hit. So it
Yeah.
moves your insides, but it doesn't stay there. It just comes and goes, and it's tight and punchy, which works really well, nice for quick tempos.
Yeah. Exactly. Like, excuse me, a
Tempo
lot
being
of
the operative word over here.
tempo being the operative metal. But I mean, even if it's a really quick song, like a tat 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 kind of, like, that kind of groove, it'll really help. And like Anupam mentioned again, uh, we actually started with this mic dead in the center, and then we actually found ourselves pulling it a little away closer to the reso head, sort of in between the middle and the reso head, in that kind of mid zone is where it finally sat. But yeah, when it was
Sorry, I'll be touching on this in great detail, much greater detail tomorrow. But to cut a long story
day
short,
after,
I
you
have
mean?
used day after. Sorry,
Yeah, no
I
worries.
have used this mic. This is the dominant mic in the kick drum sound that you hear.
Right. I just want to also touch upon this while we're talking about this. There are a bunch of other uses for this, both for the 902 and the 901. I've heard people use the 902, for example, on bass cabs to mic up a bass cabinet.
Yes.
You kind of place it close to the cone wherever you find the sweet spot is, and you can record bass. Can you use something like this for any other function apart
Yes.
from kick in? What are those functions?
So one of the most, these are called boundary mics.
Yeah.
So they are used for on stage, for if you have a dance performance, you will use them at the edge of the stage to capture any foot
Oh,
hits on the
cool. I
stage,
didn't know
on
that.
both
That's pretty
stage.
cool.
Yeah, yeah.
Like tap
So
dancers
that
and all of that.
tap dances and
Oh,
stuff.
cool.
So that's one use for this. So it's used in theater for that reason also. You can use it on a piano at the soundboard at the end to capture bottom end.
Oh,
So
nice.
it's a fantastic hack for that, and you get like the big bass sounds, and you get a, again, you get a kick drum like articulation from the piano.
Right.
Yeah,
Awesome, awesome.
these are two of the
Yeah,
uses
so
that I have found.
that's so yeah, I hope that answered your question, Aditya. Like, that's the kick in mic, and you saw what the kick out mic was, which is a 902 in the videos, and I can pull up a video again if you need to see it. But yeah, that's those are the two kick mics we've used for this session. All right. Uh, One big topic I wanted to address, particularly at the tracking stage, which is very important, which is cymbal bleed. It's every drummer, every engineer's nightmare if you're going to be tracking yourself. I
More the
wouldn't say
engineer's
night.
nightmare.
It's not a nightmare, but it's something to definitely consider, because when you're soloing your mics, you don't want too much of that cymbal bleed coming in, because you're just not isolating your mics enough to treat them. And when you're treating just a kick, but if you're hearing a lot of cymbals or just the snare and you're hearing a lot of the hi hats or whatever, you're not really treating the snare. You're treating the snare with a little bit of hi hat.
Yeah.
So that affects your entire mix. Your entire mix gets compromised. So it's really important. So I'm using the 904 as a vocal mic today, which is not really conventional, but whatever. It works for this purpose. I wanted to tell you personally, I use this quite a lot while I perform live, because usually other mics kind of just come in your face and I'm hitting like this, and I'll hit the stand, that'll hit my face, and probably I'll have blood coming out of my I would cut myself somewhere. So having a mic, actually, this position is great because I can sing straight down into it while playing. I can lift the angle up higher, make it come in from a different angle, just so it's easier for me to sing while I'm playing. And purely just because of the size of it. And it's kind of the same applies to toms. And it sits, if you have a complicated setup with a lot of splash cymbals, a lot of maybe a china, a couple of crashes around there, this is so convenient, and like it's quite small, so it fits into these tricky corners quite easily. So that's one thing. But now coming back to, like we said, uh just rejection, I mean, not rejection, sorry, like cymbal bleed and bleed of one drum to the other drum. Uh, what are ways you can go about ensuring you get that right? Like, what are you listening for? What is your thought process when it comes to like getting that done?
So distance is the most important, proximity being the most important one with close mics.
Yeah,
The closer you are to your snare drum, the more of that snare drum you pick up.
yeah,
If your hi-hat is close to the snare, which it often is, some drummers have such tight setups that their snare will be there and their hi-hat will be right there because they're
right.
like used to doing that. And that's a nightmare.
Yeah, you're
So
always getting hi hat in that snare
you
mic.
are
Yeah,
getting a lot of hi-hat, man. It's just you want to kill yourself. Now, typically you want to, so you are typically using a cardioid mic on your snare.
yeah.
Cardioid, the rejection pattern is right behind the pickup spot, so it will be behind the mic. So you want to face the back end of the mic towards whatever you want to reject. In this case, the hi hats.
Yeah.
Doesn't exactly work to what do you call it? It doesn't exactly work according to plan, but it does help mitigate the bleed. The best answer to bleed was something Zoran told me many years back, and he said, "Bro, you just have to embrace the bleed.
Sorry, can you repeat that? You just have to reduce the what?
You have to embrace the bleed."
Embrace the bleed. Okay,
Yeah,
because right now, as you were saying that, again, Aditya popped in another quick question about how do you cut or reduce kick drum bleed? Is
you
snare
can't.
or yeah? So yeah, yeah,
Yeah, you can't.
that's a hard one. You can gate your kick drum once you've kind of gotten it in place. You gain stage it. Hopefully, that will do some of the trick. But
I
you
think
are
he's
going
asking how can you cut down on kick drum bleeding into
into
snare
snare.
or snare bleeding into the kick drum mic. Which
Let's
one?
just read that. Can you tell us how do you cut or reduce kick drum bleed in a snare mic or a tom mic? Yeah,
Okay,
that's the
fair
question.
enough. So you can't.
So back
B
to the
you
same
are
answer. Sorry.
B you're typically dealing with a tuning mismatch. This is very important and this is
Yeah.
a very advanced topic. But what's happening is that your kick and your there is some tuning mismatch between your drums, which is giving you a dissonant resonance every time you're hitting your kick drum.
Or you
And
hit the snare. It kind of
uh,
excites the yeah.
yeah, the best way to get rid of bleed on your tom mics when you're playing kick drum is to use a rack. So
Yeah.
you have to physically separate it from the kick.
Yeah.
You actually do want some kick drum bleeding into your snare bottom mic. So
Yeah.
that's why I missed the snare bottom mic, because the kick drum exciting the snare springs adds a like a top
Character.
end to the sound, which is
Yeah.
very nice. It's very
Absolutely.
desirable.
Right. 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 Awesome. Awesome. So that was like what you said, setup B and all the tests we did with that. We're going to move to the last section and then we're going to be opening this up to questions. Uh, Sorry, it was yeah, it was the 904. I'm getting a whole bunch of questions. Suddenly
Guys,
things
please
popped up.
use the Q&A
If you
section for
can, yes,
questions.
please,
Please, please,
please use the
please.
Q&A section. There are a bunch of
We
questions
will
there that I
lose we will
haven't.
lose questions in the chat.
Yeah, we'll lose questions in the chat otherwise. Thanks again. So now moving on to our final section. I mean, I hope so far you guys have been enjoying this and it's been informative and you've you can take back something from this that you can start using by yourselves. But this one in particular, I feel is this particular test. I thought of this because not everyone will probably have the access to all these mics. I mean, we were really fortunate. Sennheiser sent us these mics so we could test them out and really see what each mic can do in these settings. But sometimes maybe budget is a constraint. Sometimes you just maybe can't afford so many mics. You just want to get a few mics to ensure you've got all the right mics. And miking your snare is really important. I mean, I feel the snare is the soul of
Yep.
you can tell different drummers by their snare tones. Like it's just so signature. So it's really important to capture that sound and really just get
The
that going for
voice.
yourself. Yeah, you're right. So this third test, this third section that we're going to like dive into right now is basically we've set up four different mics on the same snare and I've played the same groove. And we're just going to be going between each snare mic so you can hear what the difference is. So give me a second. Let me just share my screen and let's dive into this. Okay, here we go. So here we go. Okay, I'm not going to say anything. Let's just play both these videos out in its full length. Okay, I'm gonna do the same, but this is just the snare soloed. All right. So we'll get back to these again and we'll play maybe just sections of them just so you can hear them individually. But I hope that was a good representation of what these four different mics sound like on the same snare with the same drummer playing the same groove, same tuning, and everything else is consistent, just that the mics changed, right? So, Anupam, do you want to dive into this right away? What were your first findings? Like, what were your first what were your? I can already see some comments are flaring up. Yeah,
Yeah.
Sambit, E914. We're all going to get to that. That was probably our personal favorite in this test. But let's start. Okay, so we first had the E914 on the snare, which is a condenser. We've used it as overheads. We've used it as a room mic. We've used it in the past as a second snare mic with another mic always. But just by itself, what are your thoughts? What are your comments on just it?
So the first thing you want to hear when we play it back again, this time here for it, is the way the hi-hat sound changes more than anything
Yeah,
else.
Hi hat and yeah, yes,
Man, I couldn't think of anything else. I was like, okay, the hi okay, so like, this mic has this kind of a hi-hat beat. Okay, I can work with this, and this is a disaster. So, well, none of them were a disaster to be honest. But you will notice that in the 914, the hi-hats, because of the added, and in this case, you're playing closed hi-hats, so it's not such a
exactly.
massive concern. But if you were playing open hi-hats or a lot of cymbal work, man, that top end bleed would have is death
Yeah, but
on the 914.
right. So
But otherwise, the 914 sounds sick on the snare.
it sounded really, really good. Like just soloed by itself. I've always heard it in combination with something else. Just this by itself, it really, really like stood out for me. Definitely one of the highlights of this test for me. Let's move on to the second one, which is the MD421. Like I said, we'll just talk about the notes of what we kind of experience with these mics, and I'll play it back for you again so that you all get an idea again, and you can probably direct questions also based on that. What about the MD421? For me, my first thought was capturing a lot more low end
Yeah.
than all the other mics. Like,
I thought the mid-range push and the general focus of the mic worked better for me in the
yeah,
mix scenario. Of course, 914 seems to be your favorite over here. Because
winner.
I found that when I and also I think Zoom is doing something funny to the audio, to be honest. But
Right. So if sorry,
you
just
will
to cut you
find
short there, if Zoom is doing something funny to your audio, like we said, don't worry. The stuff is also going to be on YouTube that you can check out later. Just we'll communication for that will come out as and when. But yeah. Sorry, Anupam.
so in the 421 for me in particular, and I've always noticed this thing which is fantastic about the 421 is it's got a lot of focus, and it really it reinforces the right bottom end frequencies that you want.
Yeah.
It like the 914 also pushes a lot of bottom end, but it pushes it slightly lower down. So it tends to sound a bit more pillowy, but on the 421 it's much tighter and much more attacky.
Yeah.
So you lose a bit of attack on the 914 for sure. So in a mix
Exactly. Yeah.
situation, soloed it might sound great, but in a mix your snare will dip a little bit for sure.
Right. 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 The third one we used was the 906. Again, this is traditionally a guitar cab
Hmm.
mic, right? But it's a good mic. It's a great mic, and I've seen a lot of people recommend using it on a snare, on flow toms. We also did a bunch of tests, but the purpose of this exercise was, I mean, in my opinion, I thought the 906 is if, let's say, you have this one mic that you want to add to your sort of arsenal of mics, which is a really nice, versatile mic which can do multiple things, can be used in multiple different settings. Maybe the 906 is something to consider. Definitely on snare, it did have some character. It did offer something which was quite interesting. But what do you think? What were your findings? What were your?
So this for me was the least favorite mic for me.
I knew that.
Uh, no, but I think it's also, I was just thinking about this. I think the 906 is not a good pair for your playing in this snare tune,
Yeah, exactly,
because
exactly.
it lacks that bottom end push, and it lacks that, it has more of the mid range crank, which I wouldn't want so much of it for your playing, because you're already hitting it so nice, so well, you're digging into it. So
Yeah,
I have a lot of mid range information to begin with from the hit. But for a softer drummer, or for like a Tame Impala kind of drummer
yeah,
who's not hitting rim shots, who's hitting dead center,
right.
I think it would work really well.
So I saw another question that just since you said Tame Impala, which is that sort of muted drum sound where you're using maybe I forget who asked the question, but I hope this answers your question. He asked about O-rings or kind of dampening or whatever. Are you going to be doing any tests with that? We haven't done any tests on this round with that. I kind of use moon gels, and I that's the dampening I like. I mean, obviously there have been different settings where you've used things like big fat snare drum. You've thrown a t-shirt onto the snare, another snare head upside down. All of these kind of mute your drum sounds.
Wallet.
A wallet. That's yeah, yeah. Every rehearsal I've been to, wallet, or sometimes every ballroom shows, you just place a wallet on your snare just to control
Or that weight that Jay has.
a snare. I mean, there are so many other products like this on the market. I've kind of used all of them. I figured for my playing and the way I hit, moon gel kind of, or these dampening gels, like Meinl has one as well called honey, drum honey, I think that's what it's called. All these things kind of work for my touch and my approach. But coming back to the 906, like you said, if you have that kind of Tame Impala muted drum sound, then maybe this mic could really hold its own on that,
Yeah, but a big fat snare drum kind of situation. Yeah.
in a big fat snare drum kind of situation, right? And if you're soft, because when you place another like a t-shirt or that a drum head or anything on your thing, you're cutting a lot of volume. Like the attack of that snare is like halved sometimes. Like you're really dealing with just half the signal. So in those situations, maybe it works. I kind of use this also as a test as a single mic to record my entire kit in that Vroost mic technique or whatever, however you pronounce it.
Mhm.
But basically, kind of above the bass drum, facing the snare, in between everything, in between your snare, your toms, your flow toms, under your ride cymbal. It kind of held up really well over there as well. It was a pretty interesting use for that. Okay, so that's the 906. We can take more. We'll hear them back again and we'll see if we have any more questions about the same. And finally, the last one was the 904. Now, I didn't hear a drastic difference between the 906 and 904 when we did this test, but just by themselves, like I said, coming back to the issue of budget, or coming back to the issue of maybe you can just get a 900 series set going around, which is a certain number of mics. You could use this 904 as the snare drum mic, and it really, really works well. I would definitely consider using it as a snare bottom as well, because it's again really convenient to kind of place wherever you need to. It's
Compactor.
small. What are your thoughts on the 904 as a snare drum mic? Like, what did it, what in it worked for you? What didn't work for you? I mean, not didn't like. What are your thoughts?
I use the 904 a lot on as the auxiliary snare mic. So like
Exactly.
I
Yeah.
I think Nirvan is there on this panel. So for example, Nirvan uses two snares for Pritam,
Yeah.
and so his main snare has snare top, snare bottom. But on the auxiliary snare, which is a smaller snare, we place the 904, because first of all you can place it a lot better
Yeah.
with regards to the rest of his kit and his cymbal setup.
Yeah. Yeah.
And when you have just a single mic on a snare which is tuned typically higher, and it's a smaller snare, it really makes it shine, because the 904 has a very nice bottom end focus again,
Right.
and it's got just enough mid-range content to make that snare shine, and
Yeah.
you can get away without using a bottom mic at times with that.
That's true. Yeah. Like
You don't mix
I,
it so
I
much.
felt it really held on its own. Like it,
Yeah.
it was a very, very, very useful mic in my opinion. Like you said, and I was just gonna say the same example. Like if you have a two snare setup going on, and you've kind of spent your money on maybe an MD421 or maybe the 905 like we discussed, or as a snare top
Yeah,
mic.
that's a mic we missed.
That's a mic we missed. If you actually have the budget and you get one of those mics, and that's great, that works fantastic. But you have a second auxiliary snare which is either tuned high or tuned low or whatever. This guy really will help you in that situation. So I'm gonna just play these videos again for everyone, just so you can hear it one last time. Actually, before I do this, let me just check one thing here. Just give me 1 second. Snare weight. Yeah, people are just commenting about how dampeners change the tone. Yeah, it
Oh
does.
yes, for sure,
And also,
massively.
I mean, it depends again from drummer to drummer. Like another drummer on this chat on the same setup would sound very different than the way I play it. I mean, the way I angle my snare. There are so many factors that come into play. That's another seminar in itself, right? But anyway, so let's get back again to this. Like I said, we're going to just do a full mix of everything. And all of them soloed one last time. All right. So, yeah, those are again all our mic tests. And I hope that was informational, and I hope that was that threw some insight on basically how different snare mics on the same snare with the same drummer and everything can just put things into perspective. You can select a mic accordingly. You don't always need the most expensive mic on your snare or the most detailed mic on your snare. You can just use different combinations of mics and just make it work for you. So yeah, that's the snare test, and that's our last segment of this.
I,
So yeah.
I'm so sorry. I just want to highlight one quick thing which we forgot to mention. In this snare test, there is no room mic. What
Oh
you're
yeah,
hearing is kick, snare, and overheads, and that's it
right.
in the full mix. So there is no room mic as part of the snare test. So you can hear the difference in mics. Like the change is more apparent.
Yeah, yeah,
Keep that
yeah.
in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. We just try to leave all the close in. I mean, we try to leave it as focused as possible with these mics. So basically, with that, we've come to the end of the information that we wanted to share on this chat, and we're going to be opening this up to questions. So if you have any more questions, you can just send them in. If I have a request, I need to just do something for 1 second. Anupam, can you start looking at the questions? I'm
Yeah,
just going
yeah,
to
I'll
mute
do
my
that.
audio and video, and I'll be back in literally like 30 seconds.
Sure thing. Okay, I'm on my phone, so my phone is going to move around a little bit while I do this. All right. I'm going to start with Akash. When you record a metal song, anything close? Do you record it part by part or at one go? Depends on the skill set of the drummer. If the drummer is struggling with parts, which often happens in a studio with a metal band, then we will do it part by part. But you have to be very careful that between takes you don't lose intensity, or your drum tuning doesn't change. So I personally like doing everything in as few takes as possible, because first of all you're negating issues, and secondly you are keeping the entire thing easier. Hello. Could you guys? Oh dear God! So when I go into, I'm so sorry. When I go into Q&A, it seems that it goes. I stop accessing this thing. Hold on.
Right. Sorry about that. I had some annoying kids playing cricket outside. That ball kept hitting my door.
I'm sorry, Rahul. I just discovered something new. When I go into Q&A, I
You
think
lose
I
your.
disappear. No, I disappear. If sorry, if I go into Q&A or chat panels, I just disappear.
Okay, cool. So let me do that then. You just let me
So yeah,
just. But you can. I mean, you're still audible, right?
Samvid, you could hear me
Yeah, yeah,
while
yeah,
I was talking.
yeah.
Okay,
Yes.
fantastic. So, okay,
Okay, so
fantastic. You don't need to see me as much.
right. Okay.
Sorry. So, continuing with that, yes, with a good drummer, I would like to record with as few takes as possible. Otherwise, you often do need to do to control and manage fatigue.
Right. Can I just add to this as well? Because
Yeah, please, please, please,
what
please.
happens is particularly, I'm just going to leave this panel here. Okay, cool. Yeah, what happens more often than not is when you're doing a metal song, there's a lot of there's a lot of precision. There are a lot of notes in too little time, and it's very easy. It's very easy for them to get muddy and just not
Yeah.
sound so clear. So the focus is to actually get nice clean takes, and that's obviously something you work on with experience. It's not, I mean, yes, you can practice as much as you want, but then when you actually go into a studio for the first time, or if you're relatively new to the entire process, it can be a little frustrating because you think you know the part, and you can nail it in a take, but suddenly under the microscope of so many microphones, you know it does not sound as good as you think it will. It can sound a little muddy. So actually isolating and doing sections is the way forward. I remember in the Red album, the Bhayanak Maut Red album in 2009, that's completely how we tracked the album. We were just doing section by section.
Yeah.
But towards the Man album, the focus was let's try and do longer takes, because I had built on my recording experiences. I had learned so much from the first round. I knew what to expect. I even went in better prepared. So
I
we
think
actually
XOXO was two takes and some
was
punch-ins, if I'm
possibly
not
two takes and
mistaken.
some
Yeah.
punch-ins, exactly. So there were some songs obviously which were like spot on, some songs that were grueling, but recording a metal album is hard. But
It's
let's say
hard,
now,
man.
if it's just not metal, because as a sessions drummer I've played a lot of metal. I've also played a lot of other kinds of music, like folk music and pop fusion music. I mean, all sorts of, a lot of Bollywood sessions, all sorts of other Telugu songs, all sorts of other stuff, right? The key is going in prepared. Like, if you kind of are half baked in the way you approach it, and if you're thinking to yourself, I'm going to get into this studio, hear my drums, and then kind of feel it out and play. I mean, if you have the skill set and the experience for it, of course that works. But if you're trying this out as a relatively newer drummer, or if you don't have enough studio experience, and I mean by enough, I mean like more than 5 years of studio experience of doing this regularly, it's always good to go as well prepared as possible. Like, your goal should be to try and play the song in one take, and you should be able to do it in one take. But it's always good to probably do one master take, hear the areas that aren't really working, punch in those sections, or maybe readdress those sessions as you go along. So I hope that answers your question, Akash.
I
Yeah,
just want to add
yeah.
on the note of tracking, especially metal drums in a studio, it's physically destroying. Like
Oh man,
you have never done something as physically demanding as playing 8 hours of metal drums in a studio under the microscope of
under
microphones
yeah,
and an anal retentive engineer.
you
So
kind of get away with a lot of stuff live. Like, you really do it. It's
yes, you get away with
and
murder live,
Yeah,
but
I've also noticed, if I track, for example, after I tracked the Red album in 2009, we went and played some shows right after, like literally
yeah, man, there was a
one
huge
week
difference.
after. 1 week after, that was a cakewalk for me. I was like, this is fine. I can do two sets. In fact, I did play two sets that night. I played Scribe and Bhayanak Moth
Oh,
that
nice.
night in that Pune show. I remember. So yeah, like, it just it's like it's like running a marathon. Okay, if you got to treat it like that, you got to prepare for it. You kind of got to have to work at it every day for a little bit longer durations, and it gets better. So I
And
hope
to
that
add to
answers. Yeah.
that, to add to that, Rahul, what he did not mention is that before these albums, he would up his training in terms of running and workouts and stuff. And I think that made a big difference leading up to the album.
Without a doubt, yeah, that's
So
that's
yeah,
that's very very important. I mean, the drums are a
very
very
important.
physical instrument, so it's important to stay in shape. And we can do another seminar on drum fitness.
Yeah.
But anyway, but that's something you should keep in mind, right? So Akash, I hope that answers your question. Mayank has a question that says, can you please explain what is phase cancellation? I do believe we touched
uh,
upon that quite a lot earlier in the topic, earlier in this seminar. But if you have any more specific question, maybe you can send it in apart
but
from what we answered.
just to cut a very long story short, it's
Yeah,
when you have two or more microphones and their signals don't align perfectly.
right.
So they are called out of phase. For more, please, I urge you to Google. This is a huge topic.
Google and come back on the 6th. Maybe
Yeah,
what we can
yeah, yeah.
also do is show you real time what kind of a difference that phase makes. So yeah, I mean, putting like switching, activating it, or like putting it
Yeah.
off, right?
Akash has an interesting question.
Yeah.
Wait a minute. For toms and snare, mic holder, or clamp or mic stand? Which do you prefer? Does it even matter? Yes, it matters.
Great question. Yeah.
It matters a lot because when you have a drummer with 2 bass drums, 5 rack toms, 2 float toms, 20 cymbals, you have no space left for any mic stands. So you have to either fight to find space, or you have to really improvise. So the more clamps, the better. Kuber really likes using the snare mic clamp. I'm not a big fan because it makes the mic bounce around a lot, up and down. But I mean, typically stands will give you better flexibility in terms of placement. Clamps have many limitations due to the nature of their construction. But as far as I can help it, I would love to just clamp everything onto close mics and call it ready. But in many situations, it doesn't work.
Absolutely, yeah. It again, it depends, like Anupam said, on your setup, on the kind of space you have. Maybe if it's like a setup like this that we showed you and demonstrated with, I could have gotten away with actually putting mics on stands because there was enough room to work around with it.
Room.
But in a normal Bhayanak Moth recording session, maybe not, because there are a lot of these small cymbals in complicated, unwanted places, and just to work around that, just having a clamp is easy. And you save space, you save real estate in the studio, and that's sometimes very important, because you don't want the mistake of setting up everything beautifully and then maybe someone brushing against a mic and you've painstakingly positioned that mic in a position and it loses just because someone fiddled with the mic. So all of that is also an important factor. So you want to try as much as possible to just work with what you have. And does it make a difference? Like Anupam said, yes, definitely it makes a difference. I mean, you hear sometimes rattle on a tom, or let's say, for example, this is a common problem I've had. I'll always have an engineer tell me at a sound check, there's some rattle on your flow tom. I'm like, yeah, 1 second. And I take my tuning key off the lug that it's on, and the rattle's gone. And that rattle's happening because this tom mic is clamped on to a flow tom, and every time I'm hitting my flow tom, that tuning key is vibrating as well, and the mic is picking up through the rim of the hoop of the drum. It's picking up that. So that's I hope that answers your question. Yeah. There's an anonymous attendee.
Anonymous attendee. Hello, anonymous attendee.
Hi. Could you please talk about overhead placements? So yeah, we did touch upon that a little bit. There are different sorts of there are all kinds of overhead techniques and positions that you can try out. Like the regular stereo pair, you can do something called XY, you can do ORTF, you can do this recorder man technique that we spoke about. There are a bunch of...
I think we've touched upon this. We can go ahead with this. Yeah. I think even the next question, because we touched upon this in great detail.
Mixed facing wall, acoustic room. Yeah, we've showed you a lot of that also, right? Any comments?
Yes, about Rahul is in an acoustic treated room. I think he can talk more about that.
So where is that question?
Are you also in an acoustic treatment room?
It's all right. That's the second part of that. Right. Yes. It is an acoustically treated room. Yes. It's a room within a room. So that's basically my floor is lifted off. My walls have padding in them, and it's a false room within a room. And I have these acoustic panels that kind of help cut certain frequencies and just round off the room, make it sound a little more even. It made a massive difference. Before and after, there's a world of a difference. And I'm so used to the way this room sounds now. I can't even imagine what it sounded like before. So definitely, yeah, this is an acoustically treated room. But maybe just to touch upon this a little bit, you could also work in a room that's not very well treated or sort of partially treated. Maybe do your own DIY thing, like hanging up mattresses or, having curtains or kind of tunneling your bass drum. You can do a few things with what you have around at home to kind of make things work and kind of get what you want. But it just involves a lot of time, experimentation.
Led Zeppelin recorded in a mansion back in the day.
Exactly.
I'm pretty sure that was not...
It was not treated. Exactly. A lot of people actually look for spaces that aren't treated and have a natural kind of reverb to it or a natural presence to it. So, to each their own. I have a treated room over here, yes. But we've also done the first ever Bhayanak Moth recording, for example, Hell is Our People, was recorded in 2004 in someone's bedroom, which was there was no treatment. There were, just to add in an anecdote, the engineer used to grow some cacti in his house. All the cacti died because of the amount of the drumming and the sound. So the high decibel level, right? So, right, cool. So I hope that answers your question. Comment on using a subkick. I honestly have never used a subkick. I mean, I never have in a live or a studio setting. I mean, I think I've used it once at a studio where someone made their own subkick at Aslam Studio, where he made one using a tom and an old speaker that he just cut the cone out with, and he kind of used that. But I can't comment on this because I've never really used a subkick as much. Anupam, do you have anything to add to this?
Sorry, I think our my question orders are messed up. I missed this.
No, that's fine. It's
Yeah,
again,
any question was a subkick. I have toured with a subkick. I
Yeah.
have intense experience with a Yamaha subkick. It is fantastic, but it is extremely heavy. It weighs 20 kilos with a case. And I toured our Pritham US tour. We had a subkick. We thought it was a great idea when we started the tour.
Nice.
I think midway we started to look at the subkick and think of ways to forget it in an airport or something. But
Ooh.
it's painful to travel with. I have used it live. It made a huge difference to our kick drum sound.
Yeah.
And I am personally a huge fan of subkick. And what a subkick does, I think no mic can do, because simply by virtue of the physical construction, it's a 5 or 8 inch speaker cone, which is being wired to become a mic.
Yeah.
So yes, subkick is a big yes. It's very worthy, but be prepared for a very painful form factor to deal with.
Right.
And
Okay.
please align it with your kick out mic as much as you can. You can't, because it has to be an inch or two away from the skin. But just try and manage that. Otherwise, you will face phase issues.
Right. Oh, okay. Yeah. So that's one more thing to always keep in mind when you're using a subkick, I guess. So, excuse me. Anonymous attendee again asked, "What do you mean by rejection?" We spoke a lot about that. I feel we've addressed that question.
Rejection is when she doesn't want to talk to you anymore.
In real life, but in terms of drums and recording, we are talking we are talking about like cymbal bleed is, for example, rejection. Or in the case of our room mic, it was actually rejecting the drum kit. If your kit is facing here, you're not facing it this way, you're actually facing it the other way. That's what we meant by the term rejection. What Victor has a question that says, what is the model of condensers that is good for cymbals?
There
So
were a couple of questions on top. I'm sorry. I think we are seeing questions in a different order or
maybe
something.
a different order, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Sorry. You go on.
So let me
You
read out the
please.
questions. I think then we can
Yeah.
have
Yes, please.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Let's do
So
that.
that
Yeah,
we
let's
will
do
stick to then one thing, right? Right, cool. So like I said, oh wait, now I lost the question. Sorry. Yeah. So what condensers are good for cymbals? I mean, we've kind of discussed two pairs over here. The KM184 is amazing. The 914s are amazing. Anything else, Anupam, you want to add to this? I think I
Sorry.
don't.
Yeah. Wait a second. Yes. I think both the condensers are great. Both pairs of condensers. I would, of course, given a choice, take the 184s any day of the week. But the 914s are very usable. We use them a lot live.
Yeah.
And any pencil condenser cardioid works in a overhead situation. If you have the money for it, go for large diaphragm vocal condensers. Neumann U87s are fantastic overhead mics, but
Oof. Yeah, those are
that's
now
that's
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 needless to say. Yeah.
just buy a pair, guys. Just do it. Just buy a pair of
Just sell a
U87s for
kidney,
over.
sell a
Sell
kidney
a
and buy a pair.
kidney. Sell
I'm
a kidney
kidding,
for overheads.
but it's totally worth selling that kidney for because those mics are awesome. So
Guys,
yeah,
I'll be back in exactly 2 minutes, but my
right.
my headphones are on, so I can still hear you.
All right, cool. I'm gonna just keep addressing questions in the meanwhile. So Victor asked another question. Sorry, before that, Dhruv asked a question about overhead placements. I believe we addressed that. Like I said, there are lots of options. You can do your own research. You can try a whole bunch of combinations, experiment and see what works for you best. For me, I've noticed this sort of wide pair works. I've also tried an XY. We've tried the Recorder Man at another studio at Island City Studio, and in that particular context, it worked really cool, right? So Victor asked, is E604 or E904 good for snare drumming? I mean, you can try either, and you can see what works for you best. We didn't have the 604 on this, otherwise we would have definitely popped it on and seen what that sounded like on the snare. But we used the 904 and you heard those results, so that was great. Uh, okay, hi Sambit. I saw a lot of other drummers in here. Kwab, Nirvan, all of you guys. Big hi to all you guys. Thanks for joining in. This has been so much fun and so nice to see all of you over here. So Sambit's question is: most of the time while mixing the drums, making everything sound good, but the snare doesn't have that body or that crank. It sounds plastic and irritating. How do you get that breathing body sound in a heavy mix? So I definitely feel Anupam should answer this question because I have the same question, Sambit. Like I'm struggling with the same. I'm right there with my mixing skills. I'm good at tracking stuff and gain staging stuff, but when it comes to mixing it in, man, it's such a long journey. So let
Guys,
Anupam dive in here.
guys, the answer is very simple. Your snare top mic is out of phase.
Ah, okay. Ah,
Took me a while to realize, by the way. And ironically, once you start mixing and you start throwing plugins at everything, so when we do the mix session, I will touch upon. I've kept the mix session fairly clean, so that it so there's not I've not gone like hardcore to town and sorted it out. But I have noticed that uh, as you are mixing and you throw plugins at your overhead channels in particular, it kind of tends to throw your snare mic out of phase, and I have to keep checking for phase as I'm mixing as well.
right.
So Sambit, after you're done with the mix, you can if you check the snare top phase with your overhead, if your snare top solo mic sounds nice and full, and when you blend it in with your overhead and it's not sounding nice and full anymore, then probably it's out of phase with either your overheads or something else. So
So I'm just gonna cut you here. Sambit actually responded back saying he has checked his phase
yeah, I
and
saw those.
things seem all right at his end. So is it a yeah?
I think give me a call, bro. We'll sort it.
This is a very detailed. I mean more than a detailed question. Like it's again it's subjective. A
Yeah,
good
I'll have to hear it
yeah,
so to give
exactly. Like
you an accurate
you a good place to start is
feedback
like
on this.
I know Sambit has this whole Zoom call thing set up, which is how we did our sound check. So I'm
Hmm.
sure he can get on a call with you and you can check that
Yeah,
out,
yeah,
right? So
yeah.
thanks Sambit for that question again. Before we go to the next, I mean Mayank has a question again that he's asked. Mayank Jadhav, how do you keep your track in one key? For example, the main melody of the song is in a C. How do you match your kick? Now this
I
is
think this is a
something,
lovely question, by the way.
it's a great question, and it's something, if I can be very honest, I learned last year after all these years of. I'm just saying it as it is, like because let's be honest, with a metal band, whenever we've tracked most of the studio sessions I've done are with metal bands and like with metal music, and what happens there is you're going for a good kick sound. For me, my reference is that Panthera kind of wet big kick sound, and your kick drums are usually always triggered. So there's always a sample running underneath. So no matter how much time you spend tuning or trying to detail your bass drum mix, once that sample comes in, and in the scheme of things with the mix, you're not going to hear that kind of detail. But I was doing a session with Vasudha Sharma and the Bass Sharams last year at Island City Studio, and our engineer there came up to me and said, "Hey, what's the song, what's the key, and what I mean, kind of what's the root note?" And I think it was D. She was like, "Can you tune your kick to D?" And I was like, straight up, like, I've never done this before. How do I do this? And it was actually really simple how he demonstrated it. He actually pulled out a tuner on his phone, and he said, "Just keep playing your kick," and he placed the tuner close to my kick, and I kept going till I got to a note which was sort of around D, and then we just kept playing the kick, and I just kept playing a groove and against the song, and he was listening out to see if that sat in the mix for him, and then we came back and did a few tweaks here and there. So that's sort of, I mean, I'm no expert in melodically tuning stuff, but this was the first time in a that I was in a real situation where I was required to do something like this. And sometimes when you don't know, the best thing to say is, "Man, I don't know. How do I do this?" And I got to learn something really valuable that day. Anupam, have you ever done anything like this? Like, I know we've spoken about this, but have you ever been in a session like where you've
I have
actually
started
tuned?
doing this very actively,
Right.
and it
So
makes
how
a
do you go
very
about
big
doing this?
difference. So this was brought to my attention actually after I started touring with Indian classical musicians.
Right.
And again, Sambit has played a lot of tabla, so he will have appreciation for this. You have to tune to a key
Yeah.
when you're a percussion player in any Indian classical setup. And man, the difference that makes to your entire presentation is huge. Especially if you will notice. Again, but on the drumming side of things, Indian Ocean would tune their float tom to an E. Uh, yeah, no, but your dad is right, Sambit. Sambit says my dad drives me nuts, but he's right. You should be clear about. I think drummers often skip the melodic tuning aspect of drum tuning, and
Right.
the difference that it can make to. Often you will see, yeah, you'll be like, yeah, the toms are not sitting in the mix, and you're struggling and you're not figuring out. And very often it's because they are out of key with the rest of the song.
Right.
And every time the drummer comes in with the toms, regardless of how you're trying to EQ them, they are just not sitting because they are just sounding dissonant.
Right.
And real problem, because with toms in particular, they have a very strong fundamental frequency,
Right.
and you want to boost that frequency when you're EQing your toms.
Yeah.
Earlier, I would try and cut out that frequency, and I figured out much later that I was trying to cut it out because it was out of key. And I
Right.
was like, okay, this sounds wrong. So naturally, I would try to cut it out. But that is the fundamental resonant frequency of that tom tuned at that particular key, whatever key it's tuned to.
Yeah.
So you do need to be very much in key. The Vader drummer. So when I did 2 shows with Vader, I think it was 2 years back when they came to India. So their drummer was again very anal about tuning, and I figured out, and I asked him that, do you tune to a key? He's like, no, I just tune till it sounds good. Then after a while, and I could tell that he was just giving a bullshit answer. But after a while, he was like, I'll give you a tip. And he said, I tuned to the Darth Vader team.
Yeah.
And
So
I think that's a 135.
that's something I do as well. That's a Greg Bishonet. I saw Greg Bishonet
Greg
talk
Bissonette
about
also
this.
does that. Yeah,
So
yeah,
it's
yeah.
just like a tu 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 tu
Yeah.
tu tu. You kind of just get these intervals going in a note, and
Or a
then you kind of tune by them. Yeah,
It
yeah,
really works.
yeah, yeah. So that's a
I think
great.
that's a minor third. What did Sambit write? Hold on. Lower minor third for the resonant tom. Yeah, ho sakta hai. So
Yeah,
for the reso heads, I try to keep it simple and go with unison, because it's a, for me, it's a world of pain when you try to tune the bottom head like a upper fifth or a whatever this thing.
yeah,
Bleh.
yeah. Okay, so I'm gonna like quickly skim through some more questions because we
Yeah, please, please.
have a few more, and then that's basically this session. A lot of the other questions that everyone's been asking us about mixing and about EQing and all that.
Guys,
Like we said,
six.
that stuff is going to be addressed on the 6th. So we're not going to address those questions now. You can join back on the 6th and we'll definitely get into that. Akash Chaturvedi has a very cool question, which is, should I be buying an overhead mic? Is that the first mic he should be buying when he's
Yes.
starting out? Like, when you're considering mic selection and all of that.
Yes.
Yeah. So I would also say that, like, at least kind of figure out what overheads you want to start with and then work your way down from there. So, yeah.
Even if you have very little money in your pocket and the cheapest overhead you can afford to buy it, because it will be a condenser, and a condenser in a drum recording situation can be very flexible. And if you are willing to think out of the box, you can just run around the room, because, well, let's face it, when you're poor, you have all the time in the world.
Exactly.
So you run around with and record your mic in as many places as you can think of, and you will find a sweet spot where it
Absolutely.
works for you.
Yeah. So that would be, definitely. You can
Yeah.
start with your
Yeah.
overheads. So there are 3 questions by 3 different people. I'm assuming 2 are anonymous and one is by Akash K. I'm going to club all of them together because they're in the same vein. It basically talks about playing extreme metal stuff at about like 220, 240 BPM and with
Mhm.
regard to kicks. So all these questions are basically like, is it possible to, like, what happens there? Like, what are you going to do? So in the case of double bass with no trigger, okay, my left hits is less audible than my rights, is what someone is saying. My left hit is less audible,
More
right?
squats.
Yeah, so that's basically, I do squats, go for a run, do some skips. That will really help just even out both all your muscles. That's, like I said, that's this thing. But the topic that people want to know about is basically what does the trigger do, and how does that help, and will a mic actually capture it? So it's just very simple. The harder the hit, the more the mic is going. I mean, the more air you're going to be pushing through that bass drum, and your mics are going to capture that. But kind of the more softer it is, you're getting more of the attack. You're not getting that low end. You're getting more of that kind of the beater sound. That's
You're
happening.
I also add that when you want to, if you look at the good metal drummers, and I'm talking about the good guys like your Krim from
George Colias,
Decapitated and
Derek
this thing,
Roddy.
George Colias, that fellow from Vader who came,
Yeah,
and these guys whack their kick drums.
yeah,
Even at full tilt, their beaters are going all the way up and going and hitting the kick drum. And you have to look at how fit these guys are. They're built like tanks,
yeah, yeah, yeah.
and they all focus massively on this. That, man, you have to be fit as hell to be playing extreme metal.
Right,
It's
absolutely.
a
I mean,
sport.
it is kind of like an extreme sport. But I mean, just coming back to the question, like if you're gonna have your beater just hitting like that and not really creating too much of air that's moving, the microphone is only going to capture that much. That's when the trigger comes in handy, because then the trigger helps reinforce that sound. Again, it's a technique thing. It's not right or wrong. If you're going to be playing stuff at 240 BPM, usually with just mics, unless you're super clean like a Krim or like a George Colias or these
Gene
guys,
Oglen.
or Gene Hoagland, these guys really whack their drums, and you can hear it even at 240. You hear every note. But if that's not your style of playing, but it's just a quick kind of attack like that. But it's serving the job and triggers work. That's just a
Then you need
choice thing.
triggers.
That's just a
Then just
choice.
use triggers.
Just use the triggers because it'll help. What will happen at least is your band mix doesn't suffer. Your band
Yeah.
sounds good, and that's the bottom line. That's the most important thing in all of these, right? Okay, so
I
we
have one more
have
thing to add about, sorry, about this
yeah,
triggers
yeah,
thing. Rahul, if you remember when we met Gene Oglin in Inferno all those years back,
yeah.
just plugging that in here. And Rahul was on stage with Gene Oglin, and we asked Gene the same question. And because Gene Oglin does not need triggers, man.
He doesn't need triggers.
Even at 260 BPM, you can hear that kick drum across the hall,
Yeah,
and it shakes the entire stage when he plays.
yeah.
But he's had a very interesting feedback because they were not traveling with their engineer. So he said he would rather go with the triggers in that kind of situation because at least he knows exactly what the trigger sounds like. So for him,
Exactly.
that's a safer bet than
It's more
having an engineer.
consistent. Like,
It's
you
more
get different
consistent,
bass drums
show to
sometimes
show.
live,
Yeah.
all of that. Yeah.
So that
Yeah.
was a very interesting tip from a guy who's been doing this for ages and doing it really well for ages.
Yeah, yeah. So there's another question. Sosta will ask, what's your favorite microphone on the snare? I mean, given this test, clearly we kind of narrowed in on the MD421. The 905,
U87, bro.
that
U87
of course,
on
yeah, yeah,
everything.
yeah. Of course, it record anything on the U87,
Yeah,
exactly.
pretty much.
But the 905 was also a mic we considered. The Sennheiser 905. We didn't have it on us over this session, but that's probably a mic you can look into. Any other mic, Anupam, you can recommend?
I've used the 905 a lot with, I think, with Fossils when we were doing our Calcutta shows because the vendor had a 905 on a clamp.
Yeah.
And I had never used it before, and I was very curious to see what it sounded like. And it's kind of halfway between in size. E905 is not there right now. Well, that's really sad. E905 used to be a great mic, and it works. It's got that magic sweet spot between a 904 and a 421 in terms of tonality.
Yeah.
So, and it has a bit of a top end crank, but fantastic bottom end response. And
Right.
if you can find a old 905, it's a great snare mic. Otherwise, just take a U87 and everything.
Yeah, that's probably in this catalog. That's the best mic for sure. Excuse me, sorry. There are a lot of drumming oriented questions in terms of like technique, and like Akash has been asking some questions. If you want, Akash, reach out to me personally and I'll address that, because let's leave this to the Sennheiser mics
Drum recording.
and drum recording particularly. So I think we've actually addressed all the questions in our Q&A. And let me just look at the chat again if we've missed anything over here. I think, yeah, that's it. We've addressed all our questions in the Q&A. Yep. So, yeah, I mean, hi again, Piyush, and hi again, Suman sir. How are you?
All good, all good. And
Fantastic.
thanks, Rahul and Anupam. Thanks for such a fabulous, amazing, and informative session. It was bang on. It was so crisp, clear, and you guys slayed it. And thanks
Thanks,
to
man.
all the audience for being such an amazing audience. Because I can see the attendees were, they are here right since the very beginning.
Right.
So thanks for being such an amazing audience, and I'm sure they must have loved
That's
this.
the best.
They must have loved this session so much. I believe they must have found it very, very much enriching and so much knowledgeable, so much to learn and take away from this session. And now the third session of this series is on 6th of November, again on Zoom at the same time from 6 p.m. onwards. And yes, thank you. Thanks once again. Thanks to all the attendees. Thanks a lot to Rahul and Anupam for conducting such a fabulous workshop. This was one of its kind, even conducted by Sennheiser ever. And again, in this pandemic, we got this conducted through this online Zoom session,
Yeah.
and that's a big thing. That's a big thing. And thanks to you, particularly Rahul and Anupam ji, that it was you conceptualized and conceived this thing. It was your brainchild that how we can conduct this thing on a Zoom session or an Insta session. So thanks a lot for this. And to all the
I
attendees.
have to say something.
Yes, please.
I have to say just one word.
Yes.
Awesome.
Thank you, sir.
Awesome. Means a lot coming from you. Thank you so much. Yeah, yeah. Thank you. Thank you.
So to all the attendees, we'll now catch you guys on the 6th of November, again on Zoom at the 6 p.m. The registration link remains the same. The same registration link with you can join on the like you must have received on your registered email ID a link. So through that link, you can join on 6th as well. So yeah,
Yeah.
till then, take care. Goodbye, and take very good care of yourself. Thank
Thank
you.
you, everyone.
Thanks once again. Thanks to all of you
Thank
guys.
you.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks. And see you guys on the 6th. All
And
right.
see you guys
Yeah.
on 6th. Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Bye bye, everyone. Bye bye.
Bye.